Chapter 604. P.S. There's one more time at night. In the Chengyuan Gorge, Yingye Daoren and the rest of the Xian Gates members were all waiting on Qingdan Peak. However, their expressions were solemn. When Elder Shen returned, they knew that the current situation was extremely disadvantageous to the Xian Gate. They didn't expect Feng Haiyang to be so powerful. He actually achieved the third level of Yuanying within the Star Stone and defeated everyone from the Xian Gate. Now that Yuxiao School had already retreated, if Qinsang School and Shaoqing Sect were also defeated, then the Xian Gate would lose this sword battle. When Zhong Muqing returned, they wanted to ask what was going on. However, he didn't come out, so they didn't know what was going on. However, if the situation was okay, then he wouldn't ignore it. This caused everyone's hearts to be shrouded in a layer of haze. Yingye Daoren couldn't help but sigh, I wonder what's going on now. The surroundings were silent. No one said anything. After waiting for another 2 hours, Butian Pavilion's Elder Lu suddenly frowned and said, a fellow cultivator is coming down. Everyone felt it too. They all raised their heads and saw a golden light descending from the heavenly cloud. Yingye Daoren's gaze followed it. Seeing it land on Shaoqing Sect's peak, he exclaimed, it's Shaoqing Sect's spiritual master Sun. Someone cried out, could it be that spiritual master Sun was also defeated? Everyone's heart sank. Even Shaoqing's killing sword was defeated. There were only 3 people on the cloud. How could they compete with Feng Haiyang? One of the Xian Gate's elders forced a smile and said, fellow cultivators, there's no need to be anxious. Why don't you ask spiritual master Sun what's going on? Maybe things will turn for the better. Everyone knew in their hearts that these were merely words used to deceive others and themselves. Those who went to fight were all extraordinary. If they weren't forced, they wouldn't be willing to retreat from the Star Stone so easily. They must have cultivated there for 3 years. Not long after the golden light disappeared, there was movement in the sky. 2 golden lights shot down from the cloud one after the other. This time, they landed on Qinsang School's peak. It should be Spiritual Master Hua and Spiritual Master Luo. Yingye Daoren sighed and said, I didn't expect that even these 2 would be defeated. I guess there is no one left who can compete with Feng Haiyang for Jun Yang's spiritual essence. At this point, he shook his head dejectedly. He had thought that the Celestial Gate would definitely win this sword battle. However, he didn't expect that all of his essence energy would be taken by the demonic sect. When he thought about how the demonic calamity still had to continue for another 1,000 years, his heart sank. Elder Lu suddenly said, that's not right. There's still one person who hasn't come down yet. Yingye Daoren was startled. He thought for a moment and said, is it Sage Zhang? An elder of the Xianmen sect from the Nanhua sect said, so what if Zhenren Zhang is fine? How can he be a match for Feng Haiyang alone? Elder Lu, however, looked at the sky with a burning gaze and said slowly, not necessarily. On the peak of Qinsang School, 2 beams of light fell one after another. Hu Xian and Luo Qingyu appeared at the same time. Zhong Muqing had been waiting for a long time. He came up to greet them and asked with concern, Senior Marshal Brother Hua. Junior Marshal Brother Luo, how is it? Hu Xian returned the greeting and said with a smile, thanks to Junior Marshal Brother's clever plan, Jun Yang's essence energy is in our hands. Zhong Muqing's expression immediately relaxed. He smiled and looked at the sky again. He asked curiously, where is Junior Marshal Brother Zhang? Luo Qingyu was shocked and said, why, Junior Marshal Brother Zhang hasn't come down yet? Zhong Muqing's eyes flashed when he heard this, but he shook his head slowly. Luo Qingyu said doubtfully, this. Could it be that Junior Marshal Brother Zhang couldn't escape in time? Hu Xian pondered for a moment and said, with Junior Marshal Brother Zhang's ability, if he wanted to leave, he would have come out by now. There is only one reason why he didn't take out the Star Stone. Before he could finish his sentence, a loud noise suddenly came from the blue sky. The rumbling sound was endless, and the mountains and rivers in the gorge were responding to it. No one knew what had happened. Luo Qingyu recovered after a while and asked, Senior Marshal Brother, What do you think Junior Marshal Brother Zhang wants to do? Hu Xian looked up at the sky with a strange light in his eyes. He said, maybe he wants to stay and fight with Feng Haiyang. Inside the star's stone, as Zhang Yan took a step out, the joints in his body made a series of cracking sounds, and his whole body kept increasing. 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. A surging momentum rushed up to the sky. Only after reaching a height of 600 feet did the rising energy finally stop. He clenched his fists, and the star's stone emitted a loud rumbling sound. At this moment, his appearance was different from before. His eyes were dark, and when he looked around, he looked fierce. His eyebrows were red and purple, and they were the same color as his hair. They were dancing in the air like fire. Behind him, there was a black flame, and it was as if he was surrounded by wind and fire. In between his eyebrows, the 9 subduing magic slip was waiting quietly, and it made a soft sound. The colorful light shone through the canopy, and from afar, he looked like a demon. Feng Haiyang seemed to have noticed his change. The water that was rushing towards him paused for a moment, and it seemed like it wanted to fight with him. Suddenly, a 1,000 feet high wave was formed, and in the blink of an eye, there were 5,000 or 6,000 demons rushing out, and they rushed towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan was not afraid at all. He shouted, and his voice was like a flood. He took a step forward, and with a bang, he punched the ground. In an instant, a shocking shockwave swept through the air. With a loud bang, 3,000 to 4,000 demons exploded in the air, shattering into countless strands of essence qi. The remaining 1,000 fearlessly rushed forward and bit his body. However, after a series of biting and tearing sounds, only the sound of ka could be heard. Unexpectedly, he couldn't move at all. Zhang Yan smiled, and he raised his hand. A vast light of water rose, and all the demons that were clinging to him were sucked into it. He opened his mouth, and a giant whirlpool appeared out of nowhere, and it sucked all the essence qi in the sky back. He turned his Xian qi, and it was channeled into the demon subduing magic slip. With a little effort, the slip produced some essence qi, and it fed back to his limbs and bones. After reaching the 4th level of the divine contract, he could use the slip to absorb essence qi at any time, and he did not need to meditate anymore. Those demons were what the demon slip loved to absorb. As long as they could not break his body, no matter how many came, he had nothing to fear. This was also the reason why he dared to compete with Feng Haiyang. With a splash, Feng Haiyang emerged from the water, and he gradually went up with the waves. He looked at Zhang Yan, who was like a giant in front of him, and was a little surprised. He thought to himself, this looks like a strength method, but why have I never heard of this method in Qinsang school? Although he had only released the thousands of demons to test Zhang Yan, he had never expected that they would be destroyed so easily by Zhang Yan. They couldn't even gather together again. If he wanted to use them again, he would have to expend a lot of his magic power to summon them again. But since he had suffered once, he wouldn't make the same mistake again. With a cold shout, he raised his hand and took out an incantation gesture, summoning the 4 devils that had been fed with Jun Yang's spiritual essence. With a command from his mind, the 4 devils immediately let out a ferocious laugh, shook their bodies, and turned into 4 rapid shadows that floated forward. The 4 demons flew extremely fast, and they were not any slower than their master's underworld escape technique. They flew back and forth around Zhang Yan's body like insects, and as soon as they found an opening, they would pounce and bite. Zhang Yan sneered, and he reached out and grabbed a handful of the black gas around him. He used his mana, and in an instant, it condensed into a big hammer in his hand. He swung the hammer horizontally, and the first demon's body turned from solid to ethereal, wanting to dodge the hammer. However, the hammer seemed to be unusual, and with a clang, it still hit the demon. The demon let out a whimper, and it retreated with a painful cry. When he raised the big hammer again, and was about to swing it again, 2 of the demons were quite cunning, and they immediately moved to the sides and dodged. Only one was quite brave. Not only did it not dodge, it nimbly spun around, turned around, and bit the back of his hand, instantly tearing a bloody wound. Zhang Yan's expression did not change, and he grabbed it with a backhand. With a shout, he used all the force in his body, and in an instant, it exploded into a ball of essence qi. His chest swelled up, and he sucked it into his body through his nose and mouth, allowing the demon subduing slip to refine it. After he grew taller, although his mana did not increase, every movement he made was filled with great strength. If he didn't care about his mana and turned into 1,000 feet tall, he would be able to move mountains and overturn seas and rivers. No matter how tough this demon's body was, it wouldn't be able to block this mountain-like strength. He raised his hand and looked at the wound. He circulated his qi, and threads of red light and purple flames came out of the wound. The wound closed up, and in an instant, it was as good as new. Previously, he didn't know the abilities of the demon, so he relied on the strength of his physical body to test it out. Now, he knew that the demon was powerful and could injure him. Although it was only a small hindrance, he couldn't allow it to wreak havoc. He had to do his best to stop it from wasting his magic power for no reason. Fighting with Feng Haiyang was not a battle that could be decided in a short period of time. He had to be prepared for the worst, and he might even have to compete with his mana. Fortunately, since the sword battle, he had hidden the bodies of all the cultivators he took in the calamity water. After he stepped into the 4th stage, he could use the demon subduing slip to turn it into his own essence qi. Therefore, even if it came to that, he did not need to panic. Because it was not easy to refine those few demons, Feng Haiyang was afraid that they would be injured again, so he used a spell to summon them back. Even if he did not have this spell, as a cultivator of the 3rd stage of Yuanying, he did have some tricks up his sleeve. Earlier, when he fought others, he had to deal with a few opponents every single time, so he had a lot of worries. Every single time he attacked, he had to be careful so as to avoid making a mistake. But now, it was different when he was only dealing with Zhang Yan, and he could display his full strength. He shouted, reaching out with his hand, spreading his 5 fingers and pressing downwards, actually using the heaven and earth sealing technique. His wrist turned downwards, and behind him, more than 10 li of tribulation water surged up with a rumbling sound, pressing down in one go. He first used the heaven and earth sealing technique to trap his opponent, and then used the calamity water to suppress him. He was competing with his opponent's mana. Even though Zhang Yan's physical body could become extremely large, his mana would not increase. As long as he could restrict his opponent's body, Feng Haiyang was confident that he could suppress him. Zhang Yan suddenly felt a restraining force enveloping his body. He lowered his body slightly and took a deep breath. Then, he let out a thunderous roar and threw a punch. This punch was like the sky and earth were turning upside down. Within a radius of 10,000 feet, the wind howled, and the spiritual energy was like a tide. It was exploding. Everywhere it passed, the flying mountains were crushed into pieces. The calamity water that filled the sky was dispersed by the punch before it even landed. Chapter 605. Feng Haiyang was shocked. He didn't expect Zhang Yan's punch to be so powerful. However, he was also proud. As a Yuanying level 3 cultivator, how could he back down in front of a level 1 Yuanying level 1 cultivator? Since he had already made his move, he might as well weigh it and see how much it weighed. He released a loud shout, stirring up the vast expanse of tribulation water. In an instant, tens of thousands of waves overflowed, covering the sky and covering the earth. Turbid waves of evil energy surrounded him, causing the sky to immediately darken and the earth to become hazy. Zhang Yan looked at the calamity water that was coming at him from all directions and felt the pressure increase. However, with his strength body, he wasn't afraid of this kind of competition. Just as he was about to attack, he thought, Feng Haiyang has more tricks up his sleeves. If I were him, I would have more tricks up my sleeves. He became cautious and grabbed with both hands. The black smoke gathered around him and turned into a pair of hammers. He took a step forward, shouted, and smashed the hammers at the calamity water. His strength was so great that when the hammers smashed down, it was like a star breaking through the sky and falling onto the plains. There was a loud noise that shook the sky and the earth. The calamity water that was coming at him collapsed. Suddenly, Feng Haiyang stepped out of the calamity water. He took advantage of the pressure of the calamity water to get closer. He was only 1,000 feet away from Yi Futian. He opened his mouth and spat out a white light. When Zhang Yan saw what Feng Haiyang was doing, he could roughly guess what Feng Haiyang was going to do next. If he hesitated or closed his eyes, Feng Haiyang would definitely use the 9 nether sorrowful wind. Yi Futian's body was huge and he was trapped in the heaven and earth sealing technique. It would be difficult for him to dodge. If he was hit by the demonic wind, even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured. These thoughts flashed through his mind in a split second. He squinted his eyes and suddenly roared at Feng Haiyang. Boom! As this sound rang out, his body trembled for 100 li. Even the star stone rumbled. Feng Haiyang had only spat out half a foot of white light when he felt like his ears were pierced through his brain. He couldn't help but stagger. Then, he flipped to the side, and with this roar, his entire body shattered. When Zhang Yan saw the white light, he felt slightly dizzy. However, this feeling was fleeting. Perhaps it was because the soul dispersing 3 dispersing qi was not completely used, so it did not affect him much. However, just now, Feng Haiyang's actions were very strange. He thought to himself, it seems that when this person uses his divine art, his true body will appear, which is why he was shaken by my voice. Although he had guessed the secret behind it, it was still difficult for him to find Feng Haiyang. After thinking about it for a while, he swung his hammers around. He continued to bombard the tribulation water. After this series of actions, more than half of the huge waves surrounding him had already dispersed. Even far away, there was quite a bit of movement, as if he was no longer able to encircle him. Zhang Yan's eyes swept back and forth. However, he did not let his guard down. Instead, he used his mind and the sword pellets suddenly flew out from the top of his head. It released waves of light and he used the sword eye to check the surroundings. There was a deeper meaning behind this action. Although Feng Haiyang's tribulation water had a murky color, after a few fights, he could tell that it was just an illusion. It was used to confuse people. In reality, the water was colorless and formless. It could be fake or real. Only by sensing the spiritual opportunity, he could make a judgment in time. Just now, with that attack, the tribulation water within a few miles was indeed dispersed by him. However, it was not enough to destroy the tribulation water that was more than 10 miles away. It was obvious that Feng Haiyang did this on purpose to numb him and wait for an opportunity to sneak an attack. Just now, Feng Haiyang was shaken by that loud roar, and he was still a little dizzy. Although he hid in the tribulation water and tried to stand still, his body could not help but shake. He raised his hand and patted his head. He sighed and thought, my eyes, ears, mouth, and nose are all protected by spells. If my soul was intact, how could this happen? Among the 6 great demon sects, most of the spells that could injure the soul would attack from the 7 apertures. Therefore, Feng Haiyang paid a lot of attention to his own defense. If it were not for the fact that 1/3 of his soul had been destroyed by the Yang couple of Yuanyang sect, he would not be so weak. At most, he would only be distracted for a short while, and then he would be able to recover. However, now he knew that he could not get too close to Zhang Yan. Otherwise, he would be seen through by Zhang Yan's roar before he could do anything. After calming himself down, he raised his eyes and saw a bright sword light flying in the sky. He was surprised. Obviously, Feng Haiyang had already noticed his trick and was prepared for it. Feng Haiyang pondered for a while. Since his opponent seemed to be using a method of strength, he might as well let him use his advantage instead of fighting recklessly. He was afraid that Zhang Yan was eager for that to happen. He should not have done what he did before. The way of fighting was ever-changing, and there were no fixed rules. Since this way was not going to work, he might as well find another way. After comparing the advantages and disadvantages of both sides, Feng Haiyang came up with a plan in his mind. He leaped up into the sky and flew back. When he was far away, he found a flying mountain and landed on it. After he stood still, he straightened his finger and cast a spell, casting the dark battle-axe in the sky. At the same time, he waved his sleeve, and the other 3 demon heads, which were refined by Jun Yang's profound qi, also appeared. He didn't expect to be able to hit Zhang Yan, but he could see that the changes were huge. Although his strength had increased greatly, to the point that he could move mountains, it was impossible for him to use the sword flight technique as it was before. Even the Dao techniques he had might not be able to be used as he wished. Zhang Yan's body was now about 600 feet tall. Even if he had a protective talisman, it might not be able to cover his whole body. Feng Haiyang did not even need to think about using mana to threaten him. He only needed to use the talisman and the demon heads to attack from a distance. Although this move could not really threaten him, even if he was a cultivator of strength path, once he was injured, he would need to use up his mana to recover. As the saying goes, dripping water can wear through a stone, and rope can cut wood. There was no need to be impatient. He could wear down his spirit bit by bit, and there would be a day when it was exhausted. As for Zhang Yan, he was just like him, using talisman to attack, but he was not afraid. Other than those treasures that had spirituality, normal talisman could at most fly a mile away. At this moment, he was hiding more than 10 miles away. Even if there were 1 or 2 attacks, he would be able to handle it. On the other hand, the demon heads under him were different from the dark battle-axe. First, they had spirituality, and second, they had the souls of the elders in the sect. After they flew away, they could look for opportunities to attack the enemy without being controlled. He made an incantation gesture and released the restraints. The 3 devil heads and the mutant battle axe immediately rushed forward arrogantly. At the same time, he waved his hand, and with a rumble, the tribulation water gathered again. He pointed forward, and the water overflowed. This time, he did not release it, but hung it in the sky, and used it as a deterrent. Zhang Yan saw these actions clearly and nodded to himself. Feng Haiyang was indeed extraordinary. When they fought before, he suffered a few losses, but that was because he did not know his battle strategy. Now that he was slightly familiar with it, he immediately found a way to deal with it. This demon had its own intelligence. Now that it was attacking together with the magic treasure, it was different from before. If he wanted to kill it again, it wouldn't be so easy. Furthermore, his body was so huge that even if he released the heaven and earth leaf, it wouldn't be able to cover much of it. Previously, when he turned into a giant, he borrowed the help of strength path to break through. He did not use any mana, but if he wanted to change again after returning to his original body, he would have to think about it carefully. At this moment, although he looked very majestic, his body was so huge, and the minute he used his mana was not as good as usual. This was not much of a difference, but in the eyes of a veteran like Feng Haiyang, it was enough to grasp the opportunity. With a slight thought in his mind, the heaven and earth leaf and the longevity-locking sun cicada sensed it and immediately rushed out of the aperture between his brows. The former turned into a large golden light barrier and hung above him, while the latter turned into a clear light and flew out, taking the initiative to find the dark battle-axe of Samadhi. The dark battle-axe immediately recognized the power of the sun-locking sun cicada, and it let out a whistle. It did not want to be entangled with it, and instead, it scuttled to the side, trying to avoid it. The clear light, however, did not want to let it go. It drew a half arc and chased after it. The 3 devils had suffered a big loss last time, so they were a bit afraid, but they didn't dare to get too close. When they pretended to enter the inner circle, they suddenly retreated and kept circling around Zhang Yan like annoying mosquitoes. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't be driven away. After the dark battle-axe circled a few times, it seemed like it was annoyed by the sun-locking sun cicada, and it suddenly turned into a shadow, and disappeared into the clouds. The sun-locking sun cicada could not find its target, and it could only circle on the spot. Feng Haiyang had been watching the battle, and at this moment, he felt that his chance had come. His eyes flashed, and he pressed down with his hand. With a rumble, the tribulation water that was hanging above suddenly fell down. The heaven and earth leaf suddenly trembled, and the golden light spread out. However, the tribulation water had the ability to pollute treasures, and it was extremely powerful. After resisting for the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the golden light was gradually shaved off. Zhang Yan was afraid that it would be injured, and he called it back with a spell. At the same time, he flipped his palms and slapped upwards. With a bang, a force surged out, and the tribulation water that was splashing down was shattered into pieces. In the middle of the sky, a pale light suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and with a shrill whistle, it flew over quickly. With a clang, it chopped at Zhang Yan's neck, but it was repelled by his tough bones. With a sway of its body, it did not wait for the sun-locking sun cicada to come up, and it disappeared again. At the same time, the three demons saw that there was an opportunity, and they quietly slipped into the inner circle. They opened their mouths and bit at him. Zhang Yan laughed out loud, and with a sway of his body, in the blink of an eye, his huge body disappeared, and he returned to his original appearance. The three demons pounced on empty air. At this moment, he was only slightly weaker than before, but his body was still as strong as metal. Moreover, he was able to use his techniques, and his flying sword was no longer a hindrance. When fighting with an enemy, there was no such thing as being passive. The only way to fight back was to fight back. He flicked his sleeve, and he turned into a ray of sword light, and flew towards Feng Haiyang. Feng Haiyang's heart trembled a little. In this kind of situation where he could only take a beating and could not fight back, he believed that as long as Zhang Yan did not want to be in a stalemate, he would definitely find a way to break the situation first. Then, his chance would come. Although he had guessed what Zhang Yan was going to do next, he did not expect him to react so quickly. He almost immediately gave up his advantage, and his decisiveness shocked him. From Zhang Yan's point of view, since his weakness had been found, he no longer had an advantage. It was better to give up early than to hold on to it. That would be a useless move. In the sky, a ray of sword light shot through the sky, and arrived in front of a mountain peak. The golden light exploded, and turned into 64 wheels of swords that slashed downwards. Chapter 606. P.S. There's one more today. 64 rays of sword gleam poured down, and countless golden lights flickered on the peak like dancing fireflies. The sword aura that burst out almost shaved off a layer of soil and rocks below. After a while, Zhang Yan retracted his sword gleam and looked down. He saw that there was nothing on the cliff except for smoke and dust. It was obvious that Feng Haiyang had escaped first again. He was not surprised. Back then, Ban Xiaoming's sword transformation technique was far better than his, but he still failed to take down Feng Haiyang. It was expected that his attack did not succeed. At this moment, he sensed something in his heart. He looked up and saw Feng Haiyang with his arms crossed. He had appeared on top of the calamity water in the sky. Feng Haiyang also looked over. Zhang Yan squinted his eyes. Feng Haiyang's illusory and solid transformation technique was amazing. None of the people who fought with him before could find out where his real body was. Feng Haiyang had probably covered up all the loopholes, so no one could take advantage of him. If they focused on looking for loopholes, they would be led by the nose. Since that was the case, it was time to change the method of defeating the enemy. He changed his mind and eliminated many unsuitable methods from his mind. The only method left was to have a fair and square battle of Dao techniques and mana, and see who would be able to hold on to the end. If it was someone else, they would not be able to catch up with the underworld escape technique. However, it was different for him. He had the sword escape technique and the minor universe movement technique. It was enough for him to catch up with Feng Haiyang, and he had nothing to worry about. He made up his mind and let out a roar. He flew up with the help of the sword and turned into a rainbow. He flew up along the water. On the way, there were turbid waves coming from below, trying to stop him. However, the sword escape technique was extraordinary. It was nimble and graceful. Every time there was an attack, it only took a slight turn to avoid it. After traveling for a few li, he suddenly felt his body tighten and his speed slowed down. It was obvious that he was being suppressed by the heaven and earth seal technique. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. Although he did not have a good way to deal with this move, it also meant that Feng Haiyang did not have any other way to restrain him. This divine art consumed a lot of magic power. If it was used a few more times, no one would be able to withstand it. Feng Haiyang slightly restricted Zhang Yan's movements. He took a deep look at him, then slowly sank into the tribulation water. His figure quickly disappeared. Just now when he saw Zhang Yan transform his body back, it looked like he was no longer obstructed. He immediately knew that the long-range attack method was no longer feasible. If he allowed it to chase after him, it would just be a reenactment of the situation just now. Thus, he had to change his tactics, or else he would fall into a passive position. Previously, when he fought with others, he would always take the offensive side, never taking a defensive stance. Now, he was hiding behind the water. No one would be able to find him. Instead, he would be able to attack calmly. In this way. Once again, he managed to turn the situation to his advantage. Zhang Yan flew on his sword and quickly arrived above the tribulation water. He circled around the clouds and saw that the waves below were rolling and flowing non-stop. As soon as he got closer, there would be huge waves surging up. It looked extremely dangerous and he could only think of a way to avoid it. Feng Haiyang stood in the depths of the tribulation water and looked at his actions. His eyes were especially deep as he thought to himself, Zhang Yan, how will you deal with this? The 6 great demon sects had paid special attention to the rising stars of the celestial sect in the past few hundred years. He had long known that Zhang Yan was a rare figure in the Qinsang school for thousands of years. He had formed a first-grade Dan and formed a nascent soul in 100 years. He could be said to be extremely talented. In the demon sect, the evaluation of him was only second to Huxian. However, when he really fought with him, the strangeness of his Dao techniques and the number of methods he had used were far beyond his imagination. Especially since this person's fighting experience was not below his. Thus, he had already treated him as a great enemy. He judged that in the current situation, if it was someone else, they would be helpless. However, this person might have a way to deal with it. Zhang Yan circled around in the sky and his mind kept thinking of countermeasures. He looked around and saw that the tribulation water was more than 20 miles long. The 2 ends of the water disappeared into the void and merged with the clouds. He did not know where Feng Haiyang was hiding. It was almost impossible to find him. If he did not break through this situation, he would most likely be at a disadvantage in the following battles. He pondered for a moment. After a while, he seemed to have made up his mind. His expression became serious and he suddenly flew up. In a flash, he was above the sky. He stood high up and performed a spell. He activated the 5 elements supreme mystery true technique with all his might. In an instant, the imposing manner of his entire body suddenly changed. His hair danced like fire, and the dark color in his eyes grew heavier. The astral cloud above his head rumbled and roiled, emitting the sound of thunder. Gradually, a strand of red light penetrated the top of the cloud, and when it reached the sky, it illuminated the rosy clouds red. After another moment, streak after streak of crimson flame light dispersed and floated away in succession, flying out in all directions, swaying and swaying. From afar, it looked like a fire lotus was slowly blooming, and in a moment, it was already 3,000 meters in size, and it was growing larger and larger. Since Feng Haiyang was hiding in the tribulation water and did not come out, then he might as well refine the tribulation water. Let's see where else this person can hide. Suddenly, a whistling sound came from behind him. He turned his head slightly and saw that the 3 treacherous devils had already chased over. He took another glance to the side, but the dark Dan Yin axe was nowhere to be seen. However, it must have also followed over. It should be hiding at the side, waiting for an opportunity. When the 3 demons were about 1,000 feet away from him, they stopped advancing. They did not come up nor did they retreat. They only wandered around the outer circle. It was obvious that they wanted to use the tactic of wandering to restrain Zhang Yan. Although it was not a brilliant tactic, it could make him divert part of his attention to deal with it. Zhang Yan smiled. He took a step forward, and the water element true light suddenly rose up. The water waves were boundless, and they circled around him. If the demons dared to rush in, even if they were not pulled in by the water light, they would definitely be blocked. If that happened, he would have a way to deal with them. Feng Haiyang also felt that something was wrong. Although he did not know what Zhang Yan was trying to do, he could not allow him to continue. He urged his mana and the tribulation water beside him surged crazily. This time, it triggered a monstrous tide that had never been seen before. Zhang Yan's fire element true light needed to be activated continuously with mana. The longer it was activated, the more powerful it would be. At that moment, it had not been activated to its maximum, so he could not be stopped by anyone. He stretched out his hand and pointed downwards. Behind him, a 5-colored light rose up and a yellow ray flew out. When it was 1,000 feet away, it suddenly dispersed. Like a dam being erected, it circled around and blocked in front of him. As soon as the water came, it crashed into it. The front wave had just been broken, but the back wave had already arrived, making a rumbling sound. After all, this was Zhang Yan's distraction. It could not be compared to Feng Haiyang's full force. The earth element true light only lasted for a short while before it showed signs of exhaustion. Seeing that the fire was not completely ready, he waved his sleeve and took out the heaven and earth leaf. He was prepared to use it to resist for a while. However, this action of his revealed a flaw. A demon let out a howl and transformed into a shadow. It actually ignored the restraints of the water element true light and rushed in first. It actually successfully broke into the inner circle and bit him on the shoulder. Zhang Yan's expression did not change. Instead, he smiled and said, "I was waiting for you." He made a hand sign and a golden light shroud appeared above him, isolating the inner and outer areas. The black smoke behind him twisted into a chain and flew out. With a "hua-la" sound, it wrapped around the demon. The demon suddenly screamed. Its body turned from solid to intangible, then from intangible to solid again. It changed back and forth a few times, but it could not break free from the chain. Zhang Yan calmly stretched out his hand and pointed at it. A golden ray flew out from the 5-colored light and circled around the demon. Then, it returned to the distance and disappeared. Looking at the demon again, its eyes were filled with fear. After a while, it let out a whimper and turned into a ball of essence. The demon vanquishing slip on Zhang Yan's forehead trembled slightly and sucked it in. He then used his Xian Qi and the wound on his shoulder was healed. Suddenly, Feng Haiyang felt that another demon was broken in his mind. He felt that something was wrong. These 3 demons were refined by Jun Yang's essence. Even if he used his Xian Qi again, it would not be comparable to before. At this moment, he knew that he could no longer sit and wait. He had to take the initiative to attack. He stood up and leaped out of the tribulation water. In the blink of an eye, he was in the sky. He looked deeply at Zhang Yan and raised his sleeves as if he was going to use his divine sense. Zhang Yan was always paying attention to the movements outside. When he saw this, he did not think and suddenly shouted. Feng Haiyang felt a tightness in his chest and took a step back. He could not use the Dao technique anymore. However, this time, he was prepared, so he did not suffer as much as before. He immediately calmed his mind and his breath. Then, he turned into a yellow smoke and went far away. He stood still again and made a hand sign. After a while, he let out a "ha" and spat out a ball of black wind from his mouth. Zhang Yan's expression became serious. This 9-nether great sorrow wind was almost invincible. If he dodged now, all his previous efforts would be in vain. He had to think of a way to block it. Fortunately, before he did it, he already had a countermeasure. He moved his body and used the black and yellow giant hand. After this giant hand flew up, it did not stop the enemy. Instead, it reached out and grabbed a flying mountain a few miles away and used it as a shield in front of him. He made another hand sign and another earth elemental true light appeared. It brushed against the mountain and immediately gathered the earth into steel. At this moment, the wind had arrived. When it collided with the mountain, it made an ear-piercing sound. Everywhere it passed, it stirred up mud and stone powder, causing the dust to scatter everywhere. At this moment, the hardness of the earth and stone was no less than gold and iron. However, it could not stop the wind at all. It was still blowing slowly. Zhang Yan saw that the wind was getting closer and closer. He then looked at the fire on top of his head. It seemed that there was still a little bit left. After thinking for a while, he flipped his palm and took out a talisman. Once this talisman was out, it immediately shone with a brilliant ray of light. It also plated his eyebrows with a layer of golden light. The spiritual qi almost caused the qi around him to ripple. No one would have thought that before Elder Shen left, he would lend Guan Yuan's sex treasure, the Golden Earth Axis talisman, to him. With this talisman in hand, he would be able to resist for a while. He took a slight breath and activated it according to the method in the talisman pouch. In an instant, a magnificent golden light suddenly pierced through the clouds. Chapter 607. On top of the dome, the golden clouds were shining and the clouds were reflecting the air. It looked like a golden cocoon. When the 9 underworld's sorrowful wind came in contact with it, thousands of rays of light burst out. However, the situation was completely different from when they were pushing forward as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. This time, they were firmly blocked outside. Although Zhang Yan had used the Goldnet Earthshaft talisman, he didn't know if this talisman could withstand the 9th hell demonic wind, so he didn't let his guard down. Once there was a change, he would use the lofty cloud tower to block it. If it was only for a few breaths of time, he would still be able to withstand it. At this moment, when he saw that the wind couldn't invade him, he completely relaxed. Feng Haiyang saw that he could not break through Zhang Yan's defense even after using all his methods. He felt that there was no need to fight anymore. He thought to himself, since Zhang Yan is doing this, he must have some tricks up his sleeves. Since I can't do anything to him, there is no need for me to fight him head-on. I will just find a way to escape. With this thought, he shouted in a low voice and used a sign to keep the tribulation water. Then, he used the underworld escaping technique and turned into a wisp of smoke, flying toward the location of the Junyang pot. He wanted to take advantage of this time to get the Junyang pot. Zhang Yan looked at the direction where Feng Haiyang was retreating and guessed his intention. His eyes flashed, but he did not stop him. He continued to use the true light of fire. Although the Junyang pot had jumped away, it had not been long and had not escaped from the mountain. When Feng Haiyang arrived, he found it after searching for a while. Just as he was about to take out the talisman to guide the Junyang pot, he suddenly thought of something. He frowned and thought to himself, no, I almost got tricked. The Junyang pot could not be placed in his sleeve and could only be carried by his side. If someone else used the talisman to guide the Junyang pot, although the Junyang pot might not be able to escape, it would still respond. If he took it, when he used the Junyang pot, it would expose his real body. However, there was a high possibility that he would expose his true body, and his greatest advantage would be destroyed invisibly. If he was fighting with other Xianmen cultivators, he did not have to worry about it. However, Zhang Yan was different. He had to be careful. Feng Haiyang couldn't help but shake his head. It seemed like he could only let this treasured pot run wild for a while longer. At the same time, Zhang Yan's fire element true light had already accumulated to the peak, and if he were to continue, then he would probably be unable to control it. He raised his index finger and pointed. All of a sudden, the true light of fire element shrunk into one spot, transforming into thousands of beams of scorching red light. The top part of the light dispersed, while the bottom part of the light converged, looking like a red lotus. Hanging at the top. With another incantation, it was pulled into the astral cloud. He continuously used his Tao techniques and the golden sieve talisman. Even though his Dan was of the first grade, he still felt that his spiritual power was greatly depleted. As he thought of this, he took a step, and the water element true light twisted back and forth. He had already scattered Gao Ruowang's soul, turning it into a ball of pure essence energy. He moved it in front of him and gently inhaled. It entered through his nose and mouth and was absorbed by the 9 subduing magic slip. After a short while, he felt a continuous stream of essence chi pouring into his body, and his magic power recovered a little. With a soft shout, he withdrew the golden light that was protecting him. He looked around and confirmed where Feng Haiyang was. Then, he flew up with the help of his sword and turned into a golden rainbow, charging over. Feng Haiyang knew that just now, Zhang Yan's actions would not be useless. Before he understood everything, he did not want to fight him head-on. He thought to himself, although Zhang Yan's sword escape technique is brilliant, he is not a Shaoqing disciple, after all. He does not have the true inheritance. I would like to see if his sword escape technique is more powerful, or if my Netherworld Spring sect's Yellow Springs escape technique is more powerful. He smiled coldly, and suddenly turned into a yellow smoke. He did not go up into the sky, but into the ground, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The Yellow Springs escape technique could allow one to go up into the sky and into the ground, concealing one's tracks. Especially after one's body turned into a shadow, one could even move freely under the surface of a mountain. This flying peak was huge, and it was thousands of meters tall. It was unknown where he would appear in the next moment. Zhang Yan raised his brows. Just now, Feng Haiyang had clearly seen his earth-forming steel technique, but he still dared to come here. He should have something to rely on. Zhang Yan thought for a while, and decided not to do such a useless thing. In an instant, he arrived in front of the mountain rock. Without dodging, he activated the earth escape technique and went straight up. In an instant, he entered from the outside and passed through the mud and rocks without any hindrance. He followed the wisp of spiritual vigor and chased after it. Feng Haiyang naturally noticed the situation behind him. Seeing that Zhang Yan was also passing through the mountain rock with ease, he could not help but reveal an expression of disbelief. Not only does this Qinsang disciple have vigorous mana, but he also has many divine powers. It was said that he had only entered Tao for 100 years, and his master was not a Taoist abode master. How did he cultivate all these? He shook his head and did not want to be entangled here. He circulated his mana and rushed out of the flying peak. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Yan also broke out of the ground on his sword and chased after him. Half a day later, only a rolling yellow smoke could be seen flying in front of him, and a strip-like sword gleam was chasing after him. Zhang Yan saw that Feng Haiyang was only flying in front of him, and did not come back to fight. He pondered for a while, and he could somewhat guess Feng Haiyang's intention. Feng Haiyang probably saw that he spent a lot of effort to activate the fire element true light, so he purposely flew in the sky, and wanted to use this opportunity to break the Tao technique. Generally speaking, once a spell was activated, it would require more mana to sustain it. If it was delayed for too long, even if it did not hurt the opponent, it would have to dissipate on its own. Zhang Yan secretly nodded. Feng Haiyang's opponent was indeed Daoren, and every step he took was not without purpose. If it was someone else, he would have been dragged on for a long time, and in the end, he would only be wasting his mana. However, how could he not have thought of this beforehand? The fire element true light wasn't something without a foundation. Within the high cloud, the 5 elements were circulating in a cycle. Even if he had yet to fully utilize this technique, it would not consume much of his mana. Therefore, this was destined to be a useless move. The two of them chased each other, and after 15 minutes, they returned to the Star Stone South Road. This place was filled with flying peaks, and it was different from other places. At this point, Feng Haiyang's escape became erratic. Sometimes, he would go left, sometimes, he would go right. Sometimes, he would go into the mountains, and sometimes, he would disappear without a trace. As he flew and turned, his route was extremely strange. He was using the terrain to his advantage, and he was using his escape technique to the extreme. It was obvious that he had planned this before he came here. Feng Haiyang thought to himself, after so long, the Dao technique should have dissipated by now. However, Zhang Yan cannot be judged with common sense. I need to be careful. There is no need to fight him face to face, because I need to find another way to deal with him. After pondering for a while, he came up with a plan. With a shout, he increased his speed by a bit. Zhang Yan, of course, would not allow him to escape. He yelled and used a little of his mana. Then, he followed behind Feng Haiyang steadily. He knew that Feng Haiyang must have used up a lot of his mana. There were only the two of them here, and Feng Haiyang did not have any cultivator's blood to replenish his energy. If this dragged on, the situation would only get worse for him. There was no need for him to be anxious. The two of them had been flying for about an hour, and they had made countless turns between the peaks and rocks. Suddenly, Feng Haiyang swayed his body and turned to the edge of a flying peak. Coincidentally, there was a huge waterfall rolling down there, and he disappeared in a flash. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed, and he followed behind. As soon as he entered the waterfall, he suddenly felt an enormous pressure pressing down from all directions, and his body couldn't help but stiffen. This feeling was clearly that of falling into a divine ability that sealed the heavens and the earth. At this moment, he heard a shrill scream. Two demons appeared from the void, one on the left and the other on the right. They spread their arms and legs, rushed forward, and hugged him tightly. At practically the exact same moment, a ghastly white ray of light flew out from space in front of him, and it swiftly shot over. Dang! It slashed onto his neck, and even though it didn't injure him at all, it successfully caused him to be unable to shout loudly. Feng Haiyang stepped out from the cliff behind Zhang Yan. A cold light appeared in his eyes. He shook his sleeve, and with a rumble, a ball of black wind and hell chi appeared. The reason he was circling around here just now was because he was looking for a suitable place to strike. With the two devils restraining him, even the minor universe teleportation wouldn't be able to move. For the sake of safety, he summoned the dark battle axe of darkness as well, hoping to succeed in a single strike. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. At this moment, he was indeed unable to use the minor universe teleportation, but besides that, there was no other way. At this critical moment, he thought of something, and he disappeared with the two demons. He actually used the water to escape, and when he appeared again, he was already on the peak of the mountain. The two demons sensed that the situation was not right, and suddenly panicked. They wanted to escape, but how could they? They just moved a little, and were trapped by two black chains, unable to break free. At this moment, a golden light flew down and spun a few times in the air. Both of them let out a wail, and then collapsed into two balls of essence chi. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back. A clear sound came from between his eyebrows, and an invisible force seemed to be emitted, sucking them into his mouth and nose. The two demons were broken, and if Feng Haiyang's claws and teeth were broken, only the dark battle axe of darkness was left, and there was no need to worry about it. He shook his shoulders, activated the mysterious technique, and stamped his feet. With a rumble, the whole mountain under his feet exploded. When he saw a wisp of yellow smoke flying out, he let out a shout and took a step forward, executing the minor heavens escape technique. In an instant, he was already in front of the wisp of yellow smoke. With a flick of his sleeve, more than 365 drops of heavy water flew out at the same time, almost covering the entire sky. Feng Haiyang's expression changed. At such a close distance, there was no way for him to dodge. He made a hand seal, and an evil aura flew out, covering his whole body. For the first time, he actually propped up his protective light, and the dark heavy water crashed into it, bouncing off. However, the drop of Xianming heavy water was also mixed in with the attack, and as soon as it collided with the treasure light, it exploded. The remaining force did not stop, and it rushed inside, hitting Feng Haiyang's chest, and with a bang, it smashed him into pieces that filled the sky. At this moment, a loud rumble was heard, and the flying mountains in all directions were smashed into pieces. A tumbling wave of tribulation water spread out, and not long after, it spread for more than 20 miles, looking extremely vast. Chapter 608. After the manifestation of Feng Hai's magic power was dispersed once again, he had already dived into the depths of the calamity water. At this moment, he suddenly saw a crimson ray of light shooting over. Everywhere the ordinary light passed by, the surrounding calamity water instantly melted and disintegrated, no longer existing. Feng Haiyang's eyes narrowed. He could tell that this fire was a great threat. He couldn't let it continue, or else the calamity water would be broken. If he was at his peak, it would be easy to deal with this. All he had to do was use all his mana to fight back. But now, his mana was not as strong as before, so he had to change his strategy. In this sword fight, he either expelled or killed the disciples of Xian Men. He thought he could stop Jun Yang's qi from flowing into Xian Men, but he didn't expect that he would be forced into such a difficult situation by Zhang Yan. If he wasn't careful, he could die here. He took a deep breath and suppressed his thoughts. He made a few hand signs, and before the calamity water and the true light touched each other, he parted the calamity water and dodged it. How could Zhang Yan allow that to happen? With a point of his finger, the scarlet flame surged and shot out like a flaming arrow, invading forward. However, every time it neared, the tribulation water would always be able to avoid it. Even if it came into contact with the tribulation water for a moment, it would only be refined a little and not much damage. If this were to continue, perhaps before the tribulation water could be refined by 20 to 30%, the fire element true light would be exhausted first. There was a look of admiration in Zhang Yan's eyes. Feng Haiyang was indeed a cultivator from the Devil's Doctrine who had reached the nascent soul realm for almost 300 years. His control of the calamity water was extremely exquisite. Even though his mana seemed to be lacking, he was not at a disadvantage in a head-on battle. He had cultivated for more than 100 years, but he wasn't as good as someone like Feng Haiyang. However, he had a plan. His eyes flashed. "You're using tricks. You're using tricks, then I'll break it with force." With a deep shout, he scattered the remnant bodies of the 3 elders of the devil sect. Then, he activated the 9 subduing devil slip and turned it into his own magical power in one breath. Immediately, he became 100 times more spirited. With a turn of his technique, his body rose up, and in an instant, he became 1,000 feet tall, towering like a mountain. He reached the clouds. Zhang Yan lowered his head and looked down. He mustered all his strength and punched the black water below him. When the invisible force passed by, it was like a violent gale. For a moment, there was no sound between heaven and earth. The surging water suddenly became sluggish, and a section of it caved in. After a while, the sound of the sky collapsing was heard. That section of the tribulation water suddenly cracked, and turned into water droplets that filled the sky. The scarlet flame true light at the top followed, swooshing up and nibbling away at it. Within a radius of a few li, the area was engulfed in flames. It was like a burning river and boiling the sea, causing a myriad of strands of muddy air to rise into the air. After unleashing this attack, Zhang Yan suddenly let out a long roar and stepped forward. With every step he took, he would throw a punch. The tribulation water below exploded one after another with the force of mountains being split apart. Rumbling noises rumbled, the previous sounds had just faded when the latter sounds arrived again, and they came over and over again without end. In the face of such an earth-shattering and violent attack, any kind of subtle change would be useless. Feng Haiyang tried to move forward a few times, but he could not find a chance to use his techniques. He had no choice but to retreat and temporarily avoid the attack. When he was far away, he kept thinking of a plan in his mind. He thought to himself, although I can immediately withdraw the tribulation water and leave, that would expose my real body. Zhang Yan's movement technique is brilliant, and he has many unpredictable tricks up his sleeves. I can't use this method. Although he could withdraw the tribulation water as he wished, the faster he withdrew it, the more mana he would have to expend. Moreover, Zhang Yan was using his strength to suppress him. If he did not think of a good plan quickly, even if he escaped, it would only delay him for a short while, and it would still be useless. After thinking for a while, he quietly checked his mana. Right now, his mana was less than a third of what it used to be. If he continued to fight like this, he would at most be able to hold on for 2 to 4 hours. If he still could not defeat Zhang Yan within this period of time, then it would be impossible for him to defeat his opponent. Zhang Yan has a technique that uses strength. If I want to kill him, I have to kill him in one hit. If I don't, then I won't be able to win. It looks like I have to use that technique. He was a very resilient person. Even under such a disadvantageous situation, he did not lose his will to fight. After thinking about it, he took out his technique and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was standing on top of the tribulation water. Zhang Yan was swinging his fists and breaking through the tribulation water. Suddenly, he felt something and turned around to look. He saw Feng Haiyang coming out. Without hesitation, he turned around and punched him. With a loud bang, he crushed his opponent into pieces. After a few breaths, Feng Haiyang's silhouette reappeared on the other side. It looked like he was about to get close to Zhang Yan and unleash a technique. Zhang Yan summoned his technique and shouted. His voice was so loud that it shattered Feng Haiyang's body. Feng Haiyang continued to summon his spiritual energy to materialize his body. However, he was repeatedly attacked by Zhang Yan. After a few dozen times, he felt that his spiritual energy was running out. When he looked over, he saw that Zhang Yan was still full of energy and did not look like he was running out of energy. Feng Haiyang guessed that Zhang Yan must have the ability to replenish his spiritual energy. However, Feng Haiyang's expression was calm and he was not flustered. To him, even if he still had a little bit of spiritual energy left, as long as he had the opportunity, he could turn the tables. After a while, a sharp light shot out of his eyes. He formed a spell with his hand and transformed again. Zhang Yan instantly noticed it when he saw it emerge from the tribulation water again, and he swung his fist over again. But right at this moment, a ghastly white light flew over from the sky, and in an instant, it arrived before his face. He didn't dodge, and instead opened his mouth to spit out a bolt of purple lightning that was as thick as an arm, and it struck right onto the dark saber of darkness. With a bang, the magic treasure was actually shattered into pieces. But at this moment, a shadow suddenly flew out from within, and it charged over with incomparably swift speed, and it scuttled into his mouth and nose. When Feng Haiyang saw this scene, the light in his eyes intensified. That black shadow was the divine soul of the elder that was attached to the Yin battle axe. He had done so much earlier in order to stall for time and help the elder undo the seal on the battle axe. Although the method of strength focused on the physical body, it was not that there was no way to break it. As long as one was still a human, there would be 7 orifices. This was the door to enter and exit. If one had a good method, they could find this way to injure the enemy's spirit. For example, his soul-dispersing 3 Qi was this kind of supernatural power. If a cultivator looked at it, they would easily faint. The spirit of the people in the Xian Gate was usually not as good as the cultivators of the devil sect. After the elder's spirit entered Zhang Yan's body, there would definitely be a fight between them. It would be best if Zhang Yan could win, but it did not matter if he couldn't. As long as the stalemate lasted for a while, Feng Haiyang would have an opportunity to take advantage of. With this plan, he thought that he had a high chance of winning. Zhang Yan had been hit by the dark battle axe twice before, but he was not injured at all. He would not pay too much attention to this treasure. Even if someone was on guard, they would never think that there was an elder of the Netherworld Spring sect hiding inside. As expected, as soon as the shadow entered his body, Zhang Yan's body suddenly trembled. It was as if he was frozen and could not move. Feng Haiyang's eyes lit up. How could he let go of such an opportunity? He scoffed and stirred up the last bit of water from his tribulation. It gathered into a huge wave that was 1,000 feet tall and rushed towards his enemy. Then, he leaped forward and gathered all the mana that was left in his body. He waved his sleeves and a huge ball of black wind that was swirling endlessly appeared. Unexpectedly, right at this moment, Zhang Yan suddenly opened his eyes, and a dim light flickered within his eyes that were extremely deep. He actually didn't seem to be affected in the slightest, and he let out a long laugh as his figure suddenly returned to its original state, and then he leaped up to avoid the nine-hell sorrowful gale that came straight at him. After he arrived in the clouds, he suddenly turned around and shot down from the sky like a bolt of lightning. Feng Haiyang's expression suddenly changed. He looked at the heavenly sword ray in the sky with fear. At that moment, he had used up all his tricks and there was no way he could turn the tables. But even at this point, he wasn't willing to just resign himself to death. He closed his eyes, and a rumbling sound rang out as his body suddenly transformed into a wisp of wispy smoke that shot off into the distance. His speed was so swift that it was actually unprecedented. Returning to the source and merging. Zhang Yan immediately recognized that this was Feng Haiyang's real body sacrifice technique. He wanted to call back his Yuanying Dharmakaya. Although a cultivator in the third Yuanying realm could release his Dharmakaya to fight, his physical body could not defend itself. Therefore, in times of danger, he could use his profound chi to call back his Dharmakaya. Once this technique was used, the Dharmakaya would turn into a wisp of smoke and return to his body at an incredible speed. Feng Haiyang was running away. Zhang Yan's eyes sharpened. He immediately used the minor universe movement technique and chased after him. But even though he used the technique repeatedly, the wisp of smoke in front of him was getting faster and faster. It was about to get out of his sight. His expression was unusually calm. If he was Feng Haiyang, he would definitely calculate the time and use the talisman in advance. When the Dharmakaya returned to his body, he would be able to escape from the star stone. If it really came to that, it would not be a problem. With this person's half-crippled body, he would not be able to use any supernatural powers or Dao techniques. Now that he had killed all the guardian elders of the Nether Spring sect, he could order the dragon carp to find a way to kill him. However, Feng Haiyang had seen all the skills and supernatural powers of his sect. It would be best if he could kill him here. But with the minor universe movement technique, he might not be able to catch up with him. Zhang Yan changed his mind and said, I thought I would not need to use this item. Now it seems like I have to use it. He chanted a technique and flicked his finger. A clear light flew out and turned into a square black flying pavilion that was 10 feet tall. It was a spell to summon the demonic treasury. He waved his sleeves and stepped into the door. He floated up to the 3rd floor and pressed on the mechanism. He poured his mana into it. With a loud bang, the flying pavilion suddenly moved. When it appeared again, it was already more than 20 miles away. When he was at the Mystic Light realm, this demonic treasury could already move 6 to 7 miles in one breath. Now that he was using it with his Yuanying cultivation, it was even more extraordinary. After using it a few times, he had already caught up with Feng Haiyang's Dharmakaya. Just when he was about to attack, he suddenly felt something. He looked up and saw a person in a yellow robe standing on the peak of a mountain 100 miles away from the west. The talisman beside him had already floated into the air. Zhang Yan's eyes suddenly became sharper. He suddenly moved his mana. After the demonic treasury trembled a few times, it was already in the sky. Then, he let out a long roar and leaped up. He became one with the sword and turned into a clear sword light that cut through the air. Feng Haiyang's expression changed drastically. Then, he said coldly, within 1,000 years, there will be 3 great calamities. Can Taoist Zhang avoid them? Chapter 609. P.S. I've been sick for the past 2 days and I haven't recovered yet. I'm sorry for the delay in updating. After Zhang Yan spoke, he used his chi to check. His eyes flickered. As expected, Feng Haiyang's soul wasn't here. His physical body only had a strand of God's will attached to it because it was still in the body. He used his magic power to disperse the strand of divine will. Then, he shook his sleeve and kept the head and the body into the water element true light. With a tap of his foot, he rode the conveyance light and flew into the sky. When he raised his eyes to look over, he immediately saw the nascent soul Dharma body that had transformed into smoke and flown away. However, its magic power had been exhausted a long time ago, and its physical body had been killed. It was like a tree without roots or water without a source, and it didn't pose the slightest threat to him. He shouted and turned into a rainbow. When he got close, he released a ray of water light. It rolled back and forth and kept it. Then, he controlled the water to twist it and it dispersed into a ball of chi. At this moment, he had finally killed this person. The talisman that was floating in the sky was originally shining with a golden light. It was a sign that it was about to be activated. Then, it suddenly shook and the light dispersed. It slowly floated down. Zhang Yan raised his hand and summoned it from afar. He took a look at it and casually placed it into his sleeve. With Feng Haiyang gone, he was the only one left in the star stone. However, there was still a hidden danger that needed to be solved. He circled the sky and found a flying mountain to descend on. He sat down cross-legged, and his mind sank. He had already entered his own sea of consciousness. Looking around, there was no end to this place. There was only a bright galaxy and he was standing in the middle. Not far away, there was a crystal-clear jade scroll that was similar to his body. At this moment, a 5- or 6-year-old boy was being suppressed under it. Although he looked like he was made of jade, his eyes were blood red. There was a green vertical line between his eyebrows that extended into his hair. He was letting out a thunderous roar and his entire body was filled with a crazy and violent aura. This person was the elder of the demonic doctrine who was hiding in the dark acts of Damien. Just now, the moment it entered his body, it was suppressed by the 9 subduing magic slip. However, at that time, there was still a great enemy like Feng Haiyang in front of him, so he did not have the time to care about it. Zhang Yan gave it a few indifferent glances and formed a hand seal. The demon-vanquishing slip suddenly emitted a melodious sound. Immediately, strands of propitious chi drifted down. When they reached the bottom, they condensed into golden flowers of multicolored energy. Fragrant clouds drifted about, incomparably brilliant. When it landed on the devil sect elder's body, it was as if a layer of devil chi had been removed, and his body also dimmed a little. After dozens of them, the boy's body gradually turned incorporeal, and a look of fear appeared on his face. "Fellow Taoist, please don't attack me again. Can you let me go? If you let me go, I can tell you many secrets." Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled, "I won't hide it from you. Even if you tell me the secret, I will still eliminate you today." The elder of the devil sect rolled his eyes. He said loudly, "Since fellow Taoist is here, has my martial nephew Feng lost? Let me tell fellow Taoist, before he came to fight, he had already sealed a part of his soul in the ancestral hall. This is a secret technique of the Netherworld Spring sect. Even if he is killed by you here, if he has a fortuitous encounter, he will be able to cultivate back." Zhang Yan smiled and did not mind at all. He was not even afraid of Feng Haiyang himself, let alone a part of his soul. Let's take a step back. Even if Feng Haiyang obtained a great fortuitous encounter and could cultivate back, it would be several hundred years later. How would he be able to compete with me then? When the devil sect elders saw that he was unmoved, he became even more anxious. He continuously revealed many secrets, hoping that he would stop. However, Zhang Yan did not care at all and only focused on activating the devil-subduing slip. It was obvious that he was determined to kill him here. When the devil sect elders saw his body gradually turn into mist, he knew that he had no chance of survival and stopped begging for mercy. Instead, he laughed coldly, "Zhang Yan, you may have defeated my martial nephew Feng, but you don't know that you are in big trouble. Martial nephew Feng and my martial nephew Yuan Hongyang have always been good friends. Martial nephew Feng's techniques were taught by him on behalf of his master. Now that you have killed martial nephew Feng, he will definitely seek revenge on you. Yuan Hongyang. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He had never heard of this name before, but from what this person said, it seemed to be an extraordinary person. He memorized this name and prepared to ask Zhou Chengju when he returned to see if he knew anything about this person's background. After thinking about it, he quickly made hand signs and continuously activated the devil subduing slip. Not long after, the devil's sect elder let out a cry and his body disappeared without a trace. He had already been refined by him. Zhang Yan's consciousness left his sea of consciousness and opened his eyes. He fluttered his clothes and stood up. He looked up to determine the direction and flew east, preparing to find the Junyang pot again. Because of the assistance of the moon cleansing treasured mirror, he found this treasured pot on a mountain after only an hour. He first found a smooth blue stone and sat down. With a flip of his palm, he took Feng Haiyang's sleeve. According to what he knew, Feng Haiyang had obtained a total of 4 talismans. Now that he carefully counted them, he found that the number was correct. However, 2 of them had already taken Jun Yang's essence qi. Zhang Yan also guessed that when this person entered the 3rd stage of Yuanying, he used one of the talismans, but he didn't know where the other one was used. These 2 talismans, plus the talisman that he had, made a total of 3 talismans, and he could also take 3 portions of Jun Yang's essence qi. Sect leader Qin had promised him that he could decide what he wanted during the sword fight. Therefore, he didn't have the same concerns as the disciples of other sections. He was prepared to absorb Jun Yang's essence qi while cultivating in this star stone. This way, he could get twice the result with half the effort. After 3 years, he would definitely have a great increase. Because he was afraid that he might have missed something, he carefully checked Feng Haiyang's sleeve again before cultivating. Just now, he only cared about the talisman and didn't care about anything else. Now that he had a look, his eyes suddenly brightened. He took out a sword pill that was the size of a goose egg. However, it was gray and looked ordinary, as if it had lost its spirit. He pondered for a while and held the sword pill in his palm. He used his spirit will to explore it. Suddenly, the sword pill shook and made a loud and clear sword sound. A sharp qi rushed toward him. At this moment, the sword pill between his eyebrows also jumped, and he heard a chang sound. The 2 sword wills collided in the air, and then both retreated. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised and thought to himself, this sword orb has obviously not been refined by anyone for a long time, and its spirituality is muddled, but I didn't expect it to still have such a sharp sword intent. If its owner is still alive, he must not be an ordinary person. If I'm not wrong, this thing should be left behind by Ban Xiaoming. With a thought, he put the sword orb away solemnly. After a while, he took care of everything and thought, the outcome of this sword battle has been decided. I might as well inform my disciple and my fellow Taoists. He first took out Feng Haiyang's head and placed it in front of him. Then, he took out a talisman. His expression turned serious, and he chanted an incantation. He pointed at the talisman and said, "Go." After a while, the talisman shook and suddenly burst out with a shining brilliance. It circled in the air and covered the head. With a rumble, it turned into a golden light and rushed out of the star stone. At this moment, in Chengyuan Gorge, the people from the 10 sects and the thousands of cultivators on both sides of the river were anxiously waiting for the result of the sword battle. Ingye Daoren walked in circles and looked at the sky from time to time. He seemed to be anxious and said, "Senior martial brother, it's been so long. Why hasn't fellow Taoist Zhang and Feng Haiyang decided the winner?" Elder Lu's expression was the same as usual. He glanced at the Qinsang school and said, "Fellow Taoists from the Qinsang school are not anxious. Why is junior martial brother like this?" Ingye Daoren stomped his feet and sighed, "How can I not be anxious? If the devil sect wins this sword battle, then Jun Yang's spiritual essence, he was halfway through his sentence when he suddenly wanted to stop. However, Elder Lu knew what he was thinking. Before coming here for the sword battle, the 10 sects masters had discussed the ownership of Jun Yang's spiritual essence. If the profound sect won, Butian Pavilion might also get a share. Their hard work this time would not be in vain. However, if the devil's sect won, then there would be no hope. Elder Lu shook his head and said, "Junior Marshal brother, don't think too much. That Jinren Zhang came here in the name of the Yaoyin clan, but he is not one of the 10 sects of the profound sect. Even if he really wins, that Jun Yang's spiritual essence might not be dealt with like what the 10 sects masters had discussed. Junior Marshal brother, don't think too much." Inya Daoren was stunned for a moment. He then frowned and thought for a while. However, he did not think much of it and said, "This is just a scheme of the Qinsang school. Jinren Zhang is a disciple of the Qinsang school after all. How would he dare to risk the world's condemnation?" Elder Lu did not argue with him and only said, "The outcome has not been decided yet. It's too early to say. Let's just watch." After waiting for a long time, there was a sudden gust of wind in the sky and spiritual opportunity was stirred up. Everyone noticed it and looked up at the same time. Inya Daoren also looked over anxiously. He saw a dazzling golden light piercing through the clouds and rumbling. However, it was too fast for him to see who was in it. However, when he looked at the direction it was heading towards, it was falling towards the peak of the Yaoyin clan. His face immediately turned ashen and he said dejectedly, we lost, we still lost." Elder Lu's face did not look too good either. He frowned. On the peak of the Qinsang school, Hua Xian's heart sank when he saw the situation. He took a step forward and stared at the golden light. His eyes were sharp. He could faintly see that the thing wrapped in the light seemed to be a human head. His pupils could not help but freeze. Zhong Muqing let out a long sigh and said, "Junior Marshal brother Zhang is a genius. His aptitude is so high that no one in our generation can compare to him." "I didn't expect." Luo Qingyu looked at it in disbelief and said, "Junior Marshal brother Zhang died just like that?" The atmosphere on the peak became extremely depressing. Hua Xian let out a sigh and said in a deep voice, "Junior Marshal brother Zhang is a disciple of the Qinsang school after all. His remains should be sent back to the mountain and handed over to his eldest disciple, Lu Yenni. I only hope that his primordial spirit still exists so that there is a chance for him to be reincarnated." At this moment, the thousands of cultivators on both sides of the river were shocked when they saw the scene. Some were lost, some were anxious, and some were dejected. All kinds of reactions were different. For the past 10,000 years, no matter how the situation in the Donghua continent changed, the Xian men were always the winners. Now that the devil's calamity had started, they were actually defeated. When they thought that the devil's calamity would still last for 1,000 years, they were even more uneasy. The 10 Xian men sects were still fine, but how could they, the small sects, withstand the oncoming devil's flame? Chapter 610. P.S. My body is feeling better. Come down and update as usual. The golden light was extremely fast. In just a few breaths, it shot down from the sky and landed on the peak occupied by the Yaoyin clan. At first, Wei Zihong and the others thought that it was Zhang Yan who had returned and were ready to welcome him. However, after the light landed on the ground, it suddenly dissipated and a head rolled out. Wei Zihong's heart skipped a beat. He calmed down a little and looked over. With this look, he was stunned at first, then he was overjoyed. He took a few steps forward and said excitedly, "Isn't this the devil sect cultivator Feng Haiyang?" Zhang Boyan looked at the head and couldn't help but reveal a complicated expression. Lu Mainyang was also worried about Zhang Yan's safety. Now she was relieved and revealed a smile. She came up and bowed to Wei Zihong and said, "Congratulations sect leader Wei. Daoist Master Zhang defeated Feng Haiyang this time. He is the number 1 in the 18 sect sword competition." Wei Zihong seemed to have thought of something when he was reminded by her. He turned around and looked at the two of them. He said, "Since master killed this person, I, as a disciple, should spread the name of my master." Lu Mainyang hesitated and said, "Sect leader Wei, should we wait for Taoist master Zhang to return before making a decision?" Wei Zihong smiled and said, "There's no need for that. Since master has passed down this head, then he has no intention of concealing it. Besides, everyone in the world will find out about this sooner or later, so why is there a need to conceal it? It won't show that my Yaoyin clan is stingy." Lu Mainyang lowered her head and thought about it. She felt that what he said was reasonable, so she nodded and didn't say anything more. At this moment, they suddenly heard the sound of a bell on the Dan lifting peak. Not long after, they saw streaks of light on the peaks on both sides of the Chengyuan Gorge, all rushing towards the source of the sound. Wei Zihong could tell that this was a gathering of the various sects of the Celestial sect to discuss matters. His heart could not help but move. He first looked at the expressionless Zhang Boyan, then turned to Lu Mainyang and cupped his hands. He said politely, "I wish to make a trip to Qingdan Peak to inform the seniors of this matter. Jinren Lu, please send me there." Although he was the sect master of the Yaoyin sect, he was only a core formation cultivator after all. It was inevitable that the quantity would not be enough. Therefore, he needed Lu Mainyang to go with him. Originally, he would have asked Zhang Boyan to go with him. But this person was not familiar with him and he was once a disciple of the Devil's sect. It wasn't convenient to invite him. Lu Mainyang gladly agreed. She raised her slender hand and pointed downwards. Immediately, an elegant white smoke rose from her lotus feet. She said, "Sect leader Wei, please come up. Let I escort you." Wei Zihong waved his hand. He put the head into his hand and took out a box. He put it away and hid it in his sleeve. Then, he said his thanks and floated up the cloud. Lu Mainyang rose into the air and flew towards the pill-raising peak at a steady pace. The two of them did not travel for long. He had already arrived at the peak of the mountain and landed on the open space in front of the main hall. At this moment, Ping Du Sec's elder Hua was walking towards the hall. When she sensed someone approaching, she casually turned around and frowned. He pointed and asked, "Who is this?" An accompanying disciple took a look, then cupped his hands and replied, reporting to Elder, "These two people seem to be from the Yaoyin clan." Yaoyin clan? Elder Hua's eyes were filled with unfriendliness as he suddenly sneered. "This is the meeting place of our Xian Men 10 sects. What Yaoyin clan? Do you think you're worthy of coming here?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly waved his sleeve, and a gust of strong wind surged forward. Lu Mainyang's expression changed slightly. She took a step back and waved her sleeves, creating a gust of strong wind to meet the incoming qi. She frowned and said, "Fellow Taoist, how can you attack a fellow Taoist?" A cold glint appeared in Elder Hua's eyes, and he shouted, "You're just a demon, and you're just a person. Do you think you're worthy of being called a fellow Taoist with me?" He let out a heh sound. The strong cloud above his head shook, and a golden ring with multicolored light curling around it flew out. The ring was about the thickness of a pinky finger, and there were 8 jade rings embedded on it. At this moment, it flew out, and the sound of collision was very clear. Lu Mainyang was afraid that Wei Zihong would be injured, so she did not dare to dodge. She shouted, and a white lotus flew out from the strong cloud above her head. It gave off waves of gentle spiritual light and protected the two of them within. The golden hoop landed and collided with the spiritual light. Instantly, there were many sparks of golden sparks that clanged and caused a huge commotion. At this moment, the elders and disciples of the various sects arrived at the peak. Those who recognized this talisman were all astonished. An elder from Li Mountain sect asked, 8 golden jade rings? Why is Elder Hua so angry? Who is that woman? Someone who knew replied in a low voice, "This is Jinren Zhang's accompanying protector, and the other person beside him is his disciple." Everyone then came to a realization. Elder Hu from Pingde sect died under Zhang Yan's sword, and the two sects even had discord because of this. Elder Hua was Elder Hu's senior and junior brother, and he probably heard the news of Zhang Yan's death, so he could not wait to find trouble with his disciple. Although these cultivators from Xianmen despised Elder Hua's actions, no one came out to stop him. To them, if Zhang Yan was still alive, they could go up and persuade him. They could still give him some face, but now, they did not want to offend Pingde's sect for the sake of a dead person. Elder Hua saw that Lu Mainyang had blocked his own talisman, and was slightly surprised. He was thinking about whether he should summon the Dharma spirit, but suddenly there was a blur in front of him. A clear light fell between the two of them, and with a buzzing sound, his golden ring was shaken back. He could not help but be shocked, and when he looked again, he found that it was a green bamboo branch. Luo Qingyu walked out of the main hall, raised his hand, and kept the bamboo branch. Without looking at Elder Hua, he only said to Wei Zihong, apprentice nephew Wei, "Why are you here?" "Senior Hua wanted to talk to you." Wei Zihong's expression relaxed, and he walked up to Luo Qingyu, cupped his hands, and said, "Thank you, Uncle Master Luo, for helping me out." Luo Qingyu patted his shoulder, and sighed, "Speaking of which, when you returned to the sect with junior brother Zhang, I saw you once." He smiled again, "Follow me." Having said that, he turned and walked into the main hall. Wei Zihong hurried to follow him into the main hall. Because Lu Mainyang was a demon cultivator, she could not enter the main hall, and had to stay outside. Elder Hua's expression was very gloomy, he did not expect Luo Qingyu to interfere. However, Qinsang's school was powerful, and he knew that he could not afford to offend them. He snorted, flicked his sleeves, and walked into the main hall, and sat down at his own table. Wei Zihong followed behind Luo Qingyu, and all the way to Hu Xuanwen's table. Under the gaze of many Yuanying cultivators, he did not have stage fright, and made a Dao salute, and said in a clear voice, "Zihong greets Uncle Master Hua." Hu Xianwen looked over, and saw that Zihong had extraordinary qualifications, and secretly sighed, "You're junior brother Zhang's disciple, right? Junior brother Zhang's tragic death was not what we wanted. After the meeting, you should follow us back to Qinsang." Wei Zihong could not help but be shocked, and said, "My master is still cultivating in the Star Stone, how can he die?" His words were extremely loud, causing the hall to fall into silence for a moment. Everyone's faces were filled with shock. Hu Xianwen suddenly raised his head, and his eyes lit up, and said, "Martial nephew, you mean?" Zhong Muqing, who was beside him, also reacted, and stared at Wei Zihong. Wei Zihong took out a jade box from his sleeve, and solemnly placed it on the table. Ingye Daoren stood up excitedly, and said, "Could this be?" Everyone immediately reacted, and their eyes focused on the jade box. Since Zhang Yan was not dead, then just now, the thing that fell from the Star Stone should be. Wei Zihong took a deep breath, and reached out to open the lid of the box. A cloud of smoke rolled out, and hung in the air. He pointed with his finger, and proudly said, "Feng Haiyang has been killed by my master, and this head is proof." Ingye Daoren suddenly stood up, and his eyes widened, staring at the head, and his beard trembled. After a while, he laughed loudly, and said, "It really is Feng Haiyang. In this sword battle, the Celestial Sect of Wonders has won." At this moment, the hearts of the Celestial Sect of Wonders feathered warriors were all stirred up. Previously, when they heard that Zhang Yan stayed behind to fight Feng Haiyang, they actually did not think that he would win. Later, when the talisman fell on Yaoyin Peak, they did not think too much about it. However, they did not expect that he could really kill Feng Haiyang, a third-tier Yuanying cultivator, and even send his head out. Elder Hua's expression became extremely ugly. He originally thought that Zhang Yan was already dead, which was why he unscrupulously humiliated Lu Mainyang and Wei Zihong. With Zhang Yan's temperament, this matter would definitely not end just like that. Today, this hatred was finally formed. Ingye Daoren turned around, faced the crowd, and said loudly, "Everyone, spiritual master Zhang killed Feng Haiyang." This matter should be spread to the celestial sect of wonders, and the hearts of the people of the world will be lifted. Hua Xian nodded, and said in a deep voice, Yaoyin clan Zhang Yan, spiritual master Zhang, defeated the demon Feng Haiyang, and is the #1 sword battle among the Donghua sects. Ingyadoran's smile froze, and he came back and cupped his hands. Spiritual master Zhang is a disciple of the Qinsang school. If the Yaoyin clan wins, doesn't that mean that your sect wins? Fellow Ingya. Hua Xian didn't wait for him to finish and suddenly interrupted him, saying expressionlessly, Spiritual Master Zhang is the Grand Supreme Elder of the Yaoyin clan. Don't get it mixed up. Ingyadoran wanted to say something, but he felt his arm tighten. He turned around and found that Elder Lu had grabbed him, and the latter shook his head at him. Although Ingyadoran was unwilling, he had no choice but to keep his thoughts to himself. He forced a smile and said, Spiritual Master Hua is right. Inside the Star Stone, Zhang Yan was riding a beam of light to the north. When he reached the precipice at the end, he turned around for a while and found a cliff to land on. He looked around and said, This place is not bad. With a shout, he rode a beam of sword light and cut out a flat boundary. He waved his sleeves and sat cross-legged on the cliff. Then, he took out a set of formation flags from his sleeve and chanted the incantation. The flags turned into a beam of light and landed 10 feet away. Then, he sat on a chair, and a bright light suddenly shone, forming a forbidden formation. Although he had eliminated all the enemies here, the Devil's Doctrine's tricks were strange and unpredictable. Who knew if there were any hidden tricks left behind? While he was cultivating, he would definitely be careless, so he needed to keep a hand in hand just in case. When he felt that there was nothing wrong, he took out a ball of Jun Yang's chi essence. He used his spiritual vigor slightly, and the chi floated up from his palm, from his abdomen to his chest, from his chest to his forehead, and finally to the top of his head. Then, it slowly merged into the high cloud. He focused his mind, closed his eyes, and entered a meditative state. Chapter 6:11. Spring and autumn came and went, and the sun and moon rotated. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. Zhang Yan's aura shook, and he woke up from his meditative state. His eyelids opened slowly, and in an instant, a bright rainbow flashed in his eyes. After 3 years of wholeheartedly cultivating, his appearance had recovered to its original state, and was no longer like when he first formed the contract with the spirit. Not only that, now that his cultivation had advanced greatly, the strong cloud above his head had already transformed from 1 into 2, and by his side, there was another ball of faint illusory cloud that was condensed like smoke, drifting indeterminately. Obviously, with just a bit more time, he would be able to step into the second level of the nascent soul realm. This place was comparable to the Donghua Spirit Cave, and 1 year of cultivation was equivalent to 10 years of cultivation. With the help of the Qian Tian Jun Yang's Qi essence, the effect was even more extraordinary. If he was in the outside world, he would probably need 70 to 80 years to cultivate to this level. In fact, if he was just an ordinary Yuanying cultivator, he would have broken through the barrier by now if he cultivated without any distractions. However, his Dan was of the 1st grade, and his mana was deep and vigorous, like a bottomless pit. When he cultivated, it would take him more time than his peers. Zhang Yan looked at the flying peaks floating in the star stone, and thought, with Jun Yang's chi essence in hand, when I return to the sect, even without the help of the spirit cave, my cultivation speed will not be much slower. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard the sound of metal and stone cracking. His spirit was lifted, and he knew that the time to leave was coming. Before the star stone returned to the outside of the 9 heavens, it would send away all the cultivators who came to take Jun Yang's chi essence, so there was no need for the talisman to protect it. He knew the changes, so he did not panic and sat still. He focused and waited for the time to come. After a moment, the winds suddenly blew, and countless spiritual vigor surged from all directions. A strong force wrapped around him, and after a few breaths, a bright golden light rushed down from the sky and covered him. Then, It rose into the sky and turned into a bright flowing light. In a moment of carelessness, he was sent out of the star stone. With a loud bang, he broke through the strong wind and fell down. At this moment, in Chengyuan Gorge, the disciples of various sects had already left. Only Wei Zihong, Zhang, Lu, and Dragon Carp Luren were still waiting here. A golden light shone down from the sky. Wei Zihong's eyes shone with joy. He said excitedly, "Master has returned." As soon as he finished speaking, the golden light shot down like a shooting star. Before he could even get close, he could already feel a strong gust of wind approaching him, piercing his cheeks painfully. At this moment, a green-clothed girl suddenly appeared and grabbed his wrist. She said anxiously, "Master, quickly hide. That's the astral wind from the second heavenly layer of heaven. Even a Yuaniing cultivator can't withstand it." Wei Zihong's expression tightened, and he hurriedly retreated. He'd only moved a few meters away when he heard a rumbling sound by his ears, and the brilliant light fiercely collided with the top of the mountain. The force of the collision was so ferocious that even the entire mountain trembled, and if it wasn't for the protection of the restrictions, perhaps even the altar would have been shattered. He widened his eyes and looked over, only to see a young Taoist standing there with his hands behind his back. He couldn't help but feel excited and shook off the young girl's hand. He took a few steps forward and knelt down on the ground with a thud, kowtowing and saying, "Disciple Wei Zihong respectfully welcomes Master's return." "Disciple, get up." Wei Zihong felt his arm tighten, and he raised his head in shock, only to see Zhang Yan walking over to help him up. His heart unconsciously became even more excited, but with a little fear, he said in a trembling voice, "Benevolent Master, how can this disciple be worthy?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You are worthy." At this time, Zhang Boyan and Lu Mainyang also came up to greet him. They said, "Greetings, Chief. Congratulations on your great progress in cultivation." Zhang Yan also returned the greeting. After chatting for a while, he turned around and asked, "Disciple, during the time I wasn't around, did anyone come looking for trouble?" Wei Zihong hesitated for a while and answered, "In these 3 years, with Senior C's protection and the protection of the prohibition here, nothing serious happened. It's just that, he didn't dare to hide anything and told him about being bullied by Pingda's sex elder Hua." Zhang Yan's expression didn't change, but his eyes were slightly cold. He nodded and said, "I understand." Wei Zihong hesitated for a while, then suddenly bent his knees and knelt again. He said, "Master, can you keep Elder Hua? When I'm successful in my cultivation, I'll personally look for him to resolve the karma." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. Then, he looked at him meaningfully and said, "You're really strong-willed. All right, I'll allow you. However, this still involves fellow Taoist Lu's reputation. If it doesn't work out in the future, you'll have to give her an explanation." Lu Mainyang hurriedly said, "It's just a small matter." However, Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist Lu, you don't have to be so courteous with my disciple. In the future, your opportunity might still fall on him." Lu Mainyang was enlightened by his words and seemed to have understood something. She nodded and said, "Yes." She bowed and stepped aside. Wei Zihong said loudly, "Thank you, Master." He respectfully kowtowed once before standing up. At this time, the young girl who was formed by the formation spirit walked up again and whispered a few words in his ear. He nodded unconsciously. He reached into his sleeve and took out a wooden box. He held it with both hands and presented it to Zhang Yan. He said, "Master, before the elders and disciples of Xianmen left, they had left many letters and asked me to pass them to Master to read." Zhang Yan casually took the letter and opened it. The letter was mostly filled with pleasantries. It was nothing more than a way to get acquainted with him. After reading a few more letters, they were all the same. There was nothing special about them. He didn't have the mood to read any more and was about to put it away. However, he seemed to have thought of something and his movements paused. His eyes moved a few times before he shook his sleeve and put all the letters into his sleeve. At this time, a clear and melodious whistle suddenly came from the sky. He turned his head to look and saw a brilliant golden rainbow coming from afar. It flew along the river in the gorge and arrived at the foot of the mountain in the blink of an eye. However, because of the restrictive formation, it couldn't come up. Zhang Yan said in surprise, Howling Lake Golden Sword. This sword was usually used to send messages in Longyuan Lake. Here, it was clearly telling others that this was a flying sword messenger from Qinsang School. He pondered for a moment, then reached out his hand to grab the golden sword. He pulled out the sword hilt and took out the letter inside. After reading it, he couldn't help but sneer and said, as expected, an ordinary man is innocent, but treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. Knowing that my Jun Yang's essence is in my hands, some people are not too willing to accept it. I'm afraid the journey back will not be peaceful. The name of the person who wrote the letter was Miao Kuan. This person was a registered disciple of sect leader Qin. He didn't have a deep relationship with him. Now that there was a letter, it was enough to determine that this letter was just a cover-up. The real person behind the letter should be the sect leader. Therefore, the content of the letter was very credible. When Wei Zihong heard this, he was shocked and said in fear, Master, it was your disciple who acted on his own and announced that I killed Feng Haiyang. But did I do anything wrong? Zhang Yan shook his head and said with a smile, What did I do wrong? If I was sincere in hiding it, how would you know? 3 years ago, he deliberately released the news. He had thought in advance that if Feng Haiyang and himself were dead or alive, he wouldn't have sent the letter. The experts of the 6 great devil sects would definitely gather outside Chengyuan Gorge so that they could receive Feng Haiyang. In that kind of chaotic situation, if he took the star stone from Jun Yang's essence, then on his way back to Qinsang School, he would definitely be stopped by many cultivators of the devil sects. There might even be people who were difficult to deal with. But now, it was different. Since they clearly knew that Jun Yang's essence was in his hands, then no matter what, the sects of the Xian men had to protect him to prevent the item from being taken away by the devil sects. Even if there was an incident, it would be between the sects of the Xian men, so there would be no danger to his life. And this letter from the sect master was to tell him that on his way back to the sect, there would be 3 people he couldn't fight against who would stop him. He had to be careful. Zhang Yan pondered for a while, then smiled and sat cross-legged on the altar. Seeing him like this, Wei Zihong was startled and said, Master, aren't you going back to the cave? Zhang Yan said, There's no need to rush. I have my reasons. Wei Zihong didn't dare to say more. He bowed and retreated to the side. Zhang Yan turned to Lu and Zhang, 2 people, and said, The 2 of you may leave. Although Lu Mainyang and Zhang Boyan didn't understand what he meant, they didn't say anything. They also bowed and sat to the side. They adjusted their breathing and closed their eyes to meditate. About 2 hours later, a loud laugh suddenly came from the sky. Daoist Zhang, can you allow Daoren to say a few words? Zhang Yan looked up and saw an elegant, tall, and thin Daoren standing in the air. His face was red, and his white beard fluttered in the wind. He looked like an immortal. Zhang Yan carefully looked at him, but couldn't see any details about this person. He stood up and cupped his hands, then said, Senior, please speak. Junior is listening. The Daoist said, Daoist Zhang, let me ask you. Are you taking this Jun Yang's essence for the Qinsang School or for the Yaoyin clan? Zhang Yan answered without hesitation, I came to attend the meeting in the name of Yaoyin. Naturally, it's for the sake of the Yaoyin clan. Good. That Daoren nodded and said, Do you know that there will be many obstacles on the way back? How many people will covet the things in your hands? And since you're not fighting for the essence for the Qinsang School, I'm afraid no one will come to save you. Zhang Yan's mind was clear. Sect leader Qin's letter was to tell him that the Qinsang School couldn't come forward to protect him. If his life was in danger, then the Qinsang School would be justified in making a move. But if those people were only here for the essence and didn't want to hurt him, then it wouldn't be good for them to make a move. Otherwise, the statement that Yaoyin and the Qinsang School had nothing to do with each other would be untenable. Behind this, however, was the continuation of the struggle for the essence. The current situation was a secret game between the Taoist sects and the Qinsang school. And he was in the middle of the whirlpool. How he would deal with it depended on himself. Seeing that he didn't say anything, that Daoren said again, "Taoist Daoren, I wonder if you want to hear about it?" Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Senior, please speak clearly." Daoren said, "Remember, if you're in danger, you only need to call out, Huang Yugong. I'll definitely come and help you out. I can guarantee that you'll be able to return to the sect safely." After this person finished speaking, he laughed out loud and suddenly turned into a stream of light. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared without a trace. Chapter 6:12. Just now, the conversation between Zhang Yan and Daoren was heard by everyone below, and they all revealed tense expressions. Zhang Boyan looked in the direction where Daoren had left and sneered, "Huang Yugong. I've never heard of this person's name before. I think he should be a senior expert from the 10 sections. If the manor head were to ask for help later, he would inevitably owe a favor and karma. His calculations are very good." Dragon Carprueran was originally lying under the river, but now, he raised his head and poked his head out of the water, saying, "Master, what are you afraid of? Below Chengyuan Gorge is Qing River, and this water leads straight to the East Sea. Master also knows that this lowly one is good with water, so I can escort Master safely all the way out." Zhang Yan thought for a while and rejected this suggestion. He waved his hand and said, "The people who came to stop me must know your background, so how could they not be on guard in advance? If I really do this, I will most likely fall into their trap." Wei Zihong suddenly had an idea, and he stepped forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Master, disciple has a plan here." "Oh." Zhang Yan showed some interest, "Disciple, tell me." Wei Zihong straightened his body and said with assurance, "Master, why are you in a hurry to leave now? This mountain is protected by a restrictive formation, so we don't have to be afraid of enemies attacking. If we cultivate here for a year and a half, do you think those people will still be waiting there?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "This idea of yours isn't bad under normal circumstances, but the situation is different this time, so it can't be used here." Wei Zihong was startled, and he asked in confusion, "Why?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There has always been a saying that one can only be a thief for 1,000 days, so how can one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? This matter can only be settled as soon as possible to avoid endless troubles in the future." The Jun-Yang essence in his high cloud still needed dozens of years to be completely refined. Logically speaking, it was fine to cultivate here. As long as he kept delaying, these 3 people would eventually be unable to outlast him. But things weren't so simple. Jun-Yang's essence Qi was involved in the conflict of interests among the sects, and it couldn't be avoided with some tricks. Right now, at least sect leader Qin was watching from the back. The experts of the various sects were also gathered here. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, the person blocking the way would not be too shameless. As long as this matter was resolved in a fair and just manner, these people would no longer have an excuse to cause trouble for him in the future. Wei Zihong didn't really understand, but he also knew that his method wasn't appropriate. He couldn't help but worry, "Then what should we do?" Zhang Yan said comfortingly, "The people blocking the road ahead are not things that can be won with numbers, but I have a way to deal with them. You don't need to worry too much." He flicked his sleeves. He stood up. He then said to Lu, Zhang, and Dragon Carp Liao Ren, "I'm leaving now. After I leave, I'll have to trouble the 3 of you to send my disciple back to the cave abode." Lu Mainyang said worriedly, "Manor Lord. If those people attack sect leader Wei." From the words just now, she could tell that the person blocking the way had a very high cultivation level. If they could capture Wei Zihong and force Zhang Yan to give in, they probably wouldn't be able to protect him. Zhang Yan didn't care and said, "It's okay. Just follow me. You'll be fine." The person who was blocking the road in front of them didn't even bother to look for him, the main culprit. Instead, they made things difficult for a junior in front of a fellow Taoist. That was shameless. Not only did they not gain anything by doing so, but it would also give the Dark Azure sect an excuse to intervene. Perhaps a few people would really have such thoughts, but the sect behind them wouldn't be so unwise. Besides, he had dragon carp to protect him, so he didn't need to worry about those with low cultivation level. After giving a few more instructions, Zhang Yanqing shouted and leaped up on a sword light. He did not go to the Empyrean pole heaven by borrowing the astral wind. Instead, he went east along the Qing River. Although it was a little slow, if there were any accidents, he could escape by using the water at any time. After traveling for half an hour, he suddenly felt something. He looked up and saw a faint white smoke falling from the blue sky. After landing on the river in front of him, it spread out and a person came out. He was holding a white jade ruler, wearing a red robe and a golden crown. He looked elegant and had a beautiful beard in front of his chest. He looked to be in his 40s, but his feet seemed real and illusory, as if they were covered by a cloud of mist. He said loudly, "Are you fellow Taoist Zhang?" Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. He could tell that this person was only an avatar that had come here. He stopped the conveyance light and stood on the cloud. He calmly bowed and said, "Yes, I am. May I know who you are?" The middle-aged Taoist avoided mentioning his name and only said, "I would like to invite you to stay in my cave for a few days. Are you willing?" Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. He replied politely, "I'm in a hurry to return to the sect. I'm afraid I can't stay for long. I'll have to disappoint you." The middle-aged Taoist said it was a pity and said, "I'm sure you know why I'm here. However, this seems to be bullying the weak. How about this, I'll only attack once. No matter what you do to block it, if you can withstand it, you can leave." Zhang Yan put his hands together and said solemnly, "Please enlighten me, senior." The middle-aged Taoist only waved his sleeve lightly. In an instant, the white fog on the river seemed to be blown away by a hurricane and surged over. Zhang Yan felt a huge force pressing down on his body from all directions. He immediately realized that although this attack was a pure attack of mana, the opponent's cultivation was too high. He could not block it head-on. Therefore, he did not hesitate to use his technique. A clear light appeared and a huge cloud tower appeared on the water. He leaped and turned into a conveyance light that flew inside and hid inside. The cloud rushed over and crashed into the tower. The towering cloud tower shook violently and gave off a series of explosions. However, it did not break. The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and retracted his hand. He turned around and flung his sleeve, saying, "Do as you wish, Taoist." Zhang Yan raised his hand and cupped his fist again. He summoned a beam of light and flew into the sky. He held the Cloud Watchtower talisman and used his mana to explore it. He found that with just one blow, half of the restrictions on it had been broken. If he were to encounter such a powerful enemy again, he might only be able to block it for a while. After flying for another hour, a black cloud that was like a mountain appeared in the sky. It pressed heavily in the air and blocked his way. Zhang Yan's expression did not change. He continued to fly forward. When he reached the bottom of the black cloud, he heard a clear cry. Suddenly, a bird's claw stretched out from within. It was thousands of feet long and its claws were wide open. It grabbed towards him as if it could cover the sky. This time, the person who attacked did not even greet him and attacked immediately. Zhang Yan's expression froze. He originally wanted to use the water to escape, but he had a feeling that if he really did that, no matter where he ran, the claw would definitely be able to capture him. At this critical moment, his eyes flashed a few times. He shook the talisman in his hand, and the clear light shone brightly. He still used the lofty cloud tower to protect himself. The sharp claw came up, and with a rumble, the entire lofty cloud tower creaked as if it was about to collapse. After the person in the cloud exerted his strength to grind for a while, he saw that he could not take him down. He retracted his divine power and the black cloud that was floating in the sky disappeared without a trace in an instant. When Zhang Yan retracted the cloud tower and came out, the clouds in the sky had already dispersed. The blue sky was clear and there was no trace of turbidity. He checked the cloud tower talisman and found that more than 90% of the restrictions inside had collapsed. Obviously, it could not be used anymore. He could not help but ponder. Judging from the two people before, although they were only clones that came here, the strength of their Fa had already reached an unimaginable level. If it was any other Yuanying cultivator, it would be difficult to match them. Thus, the best thing to do was to avoid them. He thought again and was not in a hurry to continue on his journey. Instead, he found a mountain top and sat down cross-legged. He circulated his qi and adjusted his breathing. After about an hour, he stood up again and looked at the vast world in front of him. He let out a shout and flew towards the north. At this moment, there was an extremely large red-eyed feathered crane in the sky. On its back sat a white-haired, white-browed, and cloaked Daoran. The middle-aged Taoist who attacked Zhang Yan before was also at the side. He turned around and said meaningfully, "I didn't expect Taoist Xian to be merciful." Xian Daoran said expressionlessly, "I'm only a shadow clone here. How can I break the lofty cloud tower? If I forcefully attack, I'm afraid even my clone will disperse. On the other hand, if Taoist Wu could put in a little more effort, I might have a chance of winning." The middle-aged Taoist chuckled and said, "This Zhang Yan has such talent. He has a high chance of becoming one of us in the future. If we can kill him now, it will save us a lot of trouble. However, we can't take his life now. It's not worth it to create hatred for a mere wisp of essence. Today, I'll treat it as doing him a favor." Xian Daoran didn't comment. He only said, "The one in front has a higher cultivation than the two of us. He doesn't have to worry so much. This Zhang Yan might not be able to dodge without the lofty cloud tower." The middle-aged Taoist narrowed his eyes and said, "That will depend on his own fortune." After Zhang Yan left Qingjiang, he walked all the way north. Not long after, the lofty shadow of the Zhaoyu mountain at the end of the horizon became clearer and clearer. With his speed, he was actually not far from the mountain gate. At most, in another half an hour, he would be able to return to the mountain gate. If he flew at full speed, the time would be reduced by half. However, the closer it was to this time, the more he didn't dare to relax. After walking for a few more miles, a brilliant cloud suddenly appeared in front of him. Multicolored light flew around, as if there were countless stars dancing in the sky, blocking his path. On the cloud stood a woman dressed in men's clothing. Her waist was slender, and she was tall. Her hair was simply tied into a bun. Her nose was straight, and her skin was fair. Her lips were extremely thin. Although her appearance was also extremely beautiful, her eyes contained a trace of coldness. Zhang Yan focused his gaze and looked carefully. He noticed that the shadow under her feet was like smoke. It was also a clone. However, he was even more guarded in his heart. He thought to himself, "Previously, those two attacked repeatedly, but they only broke my protective instrument. After that, they didn't do anything else." According to what Huang Yugong said, it won't be easy to return to the mountain. I think this person is the real person I have to deal with. I need to be careful. Chapter 613. P.S. This chapter was added yesterday, there is one more chapter tonight. At this time, Zhang Yan was still more than 10 miles away from the woman, but with a slight sense, he could faintly feel that his surroundings seemed to be enveloped by an invisible mana. This technique was somewhat similar to the heaven and earth sealing technique, but when it was activated, it was even more difficult to detect. It was obviously a remarkable technique of Taoist Dongtian. Once the difference in cultivation between the two was too great, any tricks would be futile. Even if the other party was only a shadow clone, it was not something he could face head-on. If he wanted to escape, ordinary methods would not work. Thoughts spun in Zhang Yan's mind, yet his figure didn't stop as he moved forward on the gale, and it wasn't long before he'd arrived before the young woman. Under her piercingly cold gaze that was like a blade, his expression was still composed, and there wasn't the slightest trace of fear on his face. The woman stood with her hands behind her back, stared at him for a while, and said, "You are Zhang Yan? You really have some courage, no wonder Qingyun died in your hands. But since her skills are not as good as yours, I will not cause trouble for you. Today, leave Jun Yang's essence behind, and I will let you go. If not, I will capture you and bring you back to my sect. I am not afraid that you will not submit." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. Even though the two of them had come for Jun Yang's vital essence, they had always concealed their actions and hadn't shed all pretense of cordiality. However, this woman had announced it without any scruples, so it was clear that she was determined to obtain it. He cupped his hands and said in a deep voice, "May I know how to address you, senior?" The woman said coldly, "Even if I say my name, you will not know. There is no need to say more, I will give you half an incense stick of time. Think about it carefully." At this point, as if she wanted to remind him, she added, "Although this is in front of the Qinsang school, don't expect anyone to come and save you." Hearing this, Zhang Yan waved his sleeve, and said in a clear voice, "No need. Since we are going to make a move, why wait? Let's end this quickly." The woman did not expect Zhang Yan's answer to be so decisive, and her expression slightly stiffened. Then, a sullen expression appeared on his face. Annoyed, he said, "You don't know what's good for you. You asked for it." She rolled up her sleeves and raised her hand, revealing half of her jade-like arm. Then, she pointed forward. In an instant, thousands of flying stars rose up. Like a firefly in the night. They transformed into numerous flowing lights that flickered indeterminately and streaked through the sky from all directions. Although Zhang Yan's lofty cloud tower was unable to block this person, other than that, however, he still had a few defensive treasures. He pinched the golden earth axis talisman that he had hidden in his sleeve, and a golden light immediately emerged, firmly surrounding his body. At the same time, a purple light emerged from between his eyebrows, flickering incessantly, as if it could fly out at any time. This first step was the most important of all the countermeasures he had come up with. Only by blocking the opponent's attack could he talk about the rest. However, he had no way of knowing what kind of mysterious means the Taoist heavenly abode had, so he couldn't make an accurate judgment. Therefore, he could only prepare for the worst-case scenario. If the golden talisman couldn't block the attack, he could only use his final killing move. The scattered stars came over and instantly collided with the golden light of the talisman. For a moment, the golden light flickered chaotically and trembled incessantly. It seemed like it wouldn't be able to last for long. However, Zhang Yan's spirit was lifted. He had been waiting for this moment to catch his breath. Now that he had the chance, he shook his body and used the minor universe movement escape technique. Suddenly, he turned into a ray of light and fell to the ground. When he reached the surface, he quickly entered and disappeared. The woman obviously didn't expect him to have such an ability. She was stunned for a moment, then she sneered and said, "This is the best escape technique. Within a radius of 50 miles, everything is locked by my magic power. Let's see where you can run to." She stretched out her hand and pressed down. The cloud beside her sunk down, and thousands of starlights spilled out at the same time. The surface of the ground trembled and rumbled. In the blink of an eye, dozens of pits that were hundreds of feet deep were created, and they were still continuing to go down. At this time, in the clouds, the middle-aged cultivator and Xian Daoren were watching the battle. The middle-aged cultivator said playfully, "This fellow Taoist Zhou has such a big temper. He's so unscrupulous. Isn't he afraid of offending Qinsang school?" Xian Daoren said expressionlessly, "After all, Zhou Ruiying just formed his heavenly abode not long ago. He's full of himself. Think about it, didn't we also act so arrogantly at that time?" The middle-aged cultivator nodded and said, "If Yuxiao school takes the essence, it's not a bad thing. With the previous agreement of the 10 sets, there's no need to worry about it. But today, Lady Zhou offended this fellow Taoist Zhang. In the future, she'll have a great enemy for no reason. Xin Daoren said indifferently, one of Zhou's disciples died in the hands of Zhang Yan. If you want to talk about hatred, it's already formed. Moreover, Yuxiao is a great sect that has existed for tens of thousands of years. Why would they care about such things? The middle-aged cultivator snorted and said, when the 3 great calamities arrive, if our luck is bad, even we may not be able to escape. It's better to be careful. Zhang Yan borrowed the earth escape technique and went deep underground. His original intention was to widen the distance between them. As long as he got rid of the restriction of the opponent's magic power, it would be much easier to get to him. However, after going a few thousand feet deep, he felt that the magic power was firmly wrapped around his body and didn't weaken at all. He thought to himself, the heavenly abodes technique is really unimaginable. This magic power trapping technique is round and round. It's actually not limited by the landscape. It seems like this method won't work. His 5 elements escape technique was also a magical technique. The deeper he went, the more magic power he needed. If he insisted on being strong, his magic power would be exhausted before he could escape. Therefore, after going a few thousand feet, he didn't persist. He turned around and escaped. In an instant, he was more than 10 miles away. Even so, he still didn't feel safe. He made several hand signs and after 3 breaths, he was more than 40 miles away. At this time, he wanted to move forward again, but he felt like there was a barrier in front of him. He couldn't go out. He had already expected this. Fortunately, there was some distance between him and the woman. In the time it took for her to catch up, it was enough for him to use his technique. He pulled his body up to the surface of the earth and made a hand sign. A stream of clear air emerged from his back and 10,000 beasts sleeping moonstreamers flew out from it. With a slight shake, they shot out like lightning in different directions. When the 6 recursions coffin formation was set up in a row, the area of dozens of miles immediately fell into a gloomy fog. The demonic flames burned brightly and the screams shook the sky. Zhang Yan went up to the altar and saw that Lu Changsu did not wait for his instructions before urgently activating the formation. It was obvious that Lu Changsu had also sensed the strength of this enemy. He nodded slightly and did not say anything else. He stretched out his hand and pointed. The mountain and river diagram flew out from his sleeve and immediately suppressed the main seat. If this formation could delay this person for a while, he would be able to return safely. Zhou Ruying was chasing in Zhang Yan's direction based on what she sensed just now. At this time, she suddenly saw the change in the surrounding wind and clouds. She just casually glanced at it and the escape light didn't even stop for a moment and continued to fly forward. Obviously, she didn't care in the slightest. It wasn't that she was careless, but she was confident in her strength. As long as it wasn't the mountain gate formation, she didn't need to care about what it was and just needed to force her way through. When faced with such a formidable enemy, Lu Changsu who stood on the altar was terrified, and he desperately waved the formation flag, causing the formation chi to instantly transform into countless raging flames, metal winds, rocks, and rocks that rained down. However, before they could even land on Zhou Ruying, they were dispersed by the layer of starlight that dispersed around her body. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He had already expected that this formation wouldn't be able to trap this person for long, but he didn't expect that he still underestimated her. Even if he used the mountain-river diagram to suppress the formation, it wouldn't be able to delay her for even half a minute. If this continued, it would be difficult for him to continue his plan to escape. He pondered for a while, reached into his sleeve, took out a ball of Jun Yang's essence, and threw it into the mountain-river diagram without hesitation. As soon as the essence entered, the painting suddenly emitted rays of light as if it was bathed in colorful rainbows. At this time, a spiritual light flashed, and Mountain River Child came out. He bowed and said, "Thank you for the treasure, Master." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This essence was originally going to be used on you, but now that a great enemy is in front of us, it's not convenient for me to say more. Let me ask you, how long can you delay this person?" Mountain River Child thought for a while and said, "Although I have the help of Jun Yang's essence, I can only refine a little in a hurry. At most, I can only delay this person for about half an hour." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That's enough." He didn't hesitate anymore, reached into his sleeve, and took out the talisman of the Great Lofty Cloud Tower. This talisman was divided into inner and outer restriction. Just now, although more than 90% of the outer restriction was broken, as long as the inner restriction was not damaged, he could still go back and refine it to restore it. However, he wasn't using it to defend at this moment. Instead, he wanted to borrow its power to force his way out of this world. With a tap of his feet, he flew into the hall. After sitting down, he shook the talisman and activated the Great Lofty Cloud Tower, and it slowly flew out. Although the flying speed of this thing was a little slow, this place wasn't far from the mountain gate. As long as he went outside, he could use the escape technique and quickly return to the mountain gate. Not long after, he heard a rumbling sound in his ears, and his spirit was lifted. He raised his head and saw the blue sky and white clouds leisurely. He knew that he had broken through the layer of magic power net, so he shook the talisman and put the Great Lofty Cloud Tower back. Then, he threw himself into the ground, and his body suddenly disappeared. He had already used the escape technique of the earth to move. Although this divine art consumed magic power, as long as he could enter the boundary of the Qinsang school in time, no matter how powerful the opponent was, they couldn't do anything to him. After walking for 100 breaths, he saw that there was still 1 or 2 miles left before he could enter the forbidden formation of the clear nether heavenly lake. At this moment, there was a sudden explosion behind him, and a starlight shot into the sky like a waterfall, quickly chasing after him. Zhang Yan leaped out from the ground and glanced back. He faintly smiled, and with a single step, he suddenly teleported 3 kilometers away and stepped into the restrictive formation. Zhou Ruiying was furious. She didn't expect a mere Yuanying cultivator to be able to escape from her hands. She shouted and used some kind of Dao technique, and in the blink of an eye, she actually caught up. However, the moment she stepped into the forbidden formation, her face suddenly revealed shock and anger. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning came from the sky, and with a flash, she was smashed into pieces with a crack. Inside the Changguan heavenly cave, Sun Jinren was wearing a golden robe and a crown, and he sat on a jade platform. He looked at a water mirror and said coldly, "You lost in front of a junior, and you still chased after me. So shameless. Do you really think my Qinsang school is easy to bully?" Chapter 614. Zhou Ruiying's clone was instantly destroyed. The expressions of the middle-aged cultivator who was watching the battle and Daoren changed, and they retreated to the distance at the same time. The doppelganger transformation was the result of Daoist Heavenly Abode's efforts, and it was condensed with magic power. If it was destroyed, although it wouldn't cause much damage to him, it would still take dozens of years for him to cultivate and reform. They didn't want to be the fish in the pond. The two of them looked at each other. Since the outcome was decided, they didn't want to stay here any longer. Their bodies flashed, and they turned into streams of light and flew away. After the two of them left, Wang Yugong slowly appeared in the sky. He looked a little disappointed, and after looking at the heavenly lake of Zhaoyu a few times, he shook his head, stomped his feet, and also turned into a beam of light and flew away. At first, when Zhang Yan saw Zhou Ruiying charging over aggressively, he was prepared to use the restriction formation to avoid her. But suddenly, he saw a bolt of lightning strike him, and he turned into countless objects that seemed to be light, but not light, and like a cloud, but not a cloud, and scattered in all directions. It looked like they had some spiritual consciousness, and they seemed to want to escape, but this place was already where the restriction of the clear nether heavenly lake was, so they could only crash around aimlessly. At this time, a voice suddenly sounded in his ear, "This is Daoist Xiangxiang's qi and blood. Take it, there will be benefits for you. Zhang Yan's expression changed. Only then did he know that the bolt of lightning just now was Sun Jinren's doing. He cupped his hands in the air and said, "Thank you, Sun Jinren, for helping me." Sun Jinren's voice sounded again, "I just can't stand that Zhou Ruiying's arrogant behavior. But you need to be careful in the future, she will put this on your head." Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and said, "I also have a debt in my heart." Sun Jinren laughed, and said, "That's right. We, the disciples of Qinsong, should have this kind of heroic spirit. In the future, if you have any difficulties in your cultivation, you can come to the Changguan cave and ask me." Zhang Yan cupped his fists in salute. A moment later, not even the slightest sound was heard. Knowing that Sun Jinren had left, he turned around and shone his water element true light on the pure qi and blood heroic essence, absorbing it all into his body. Then, he flicked his sleeves and stepped out of the forbidden array. Not long after, returning to the place where he had set up the formation just now, with a wave of his hand, the 72 10,000 beasts sleeping moon streamers and the mountain and river diagram all turned into streams of light and flew into his sleeve. He sensed it with his mind. He sensed that Dragon Carp Renren was still thousands of miles away. It wasn't something that could be done in a short time. Without waiting any longer, he waved his sleeves and a gust of astral wind blew. Supporting his body, he returned to the Zhaoyu Cave Manor. However, just now, when he was halfway there, he suddenly saw a Taoist boy riding on a crane and shouting in the sky, "Zhaoyu Cave Manor head Zhang Yan, Sect Master Reverend has a decree, ordering you to go to the floating heavenly palace later." Zhang Yan hurriedly steadied his body and bowed, "Disciple understands." The boy held up an item in his hand and said, "This is an entry talisman. Manor head Zhang, keep it well, don't let Sect Master wait for too long." He threw the talisman down, then lightly patted the neck of the celestial crane he was riding on. With a clear cry, the celestial bird flapped its wings and rose into the clouds, turning into a black dot in the blink of an eye. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and received the talisman. He thought for a while and felt that there was no rush to return to the manor. Sect Master seemed to have something important to do, so he should go and visit him first. Thinking up to this point, he patted the talisman. Immediately, a gentle light flashed from it and wrapped around his body. Then, it turned into a golden rainbow in the sky and shot into the sky. The talisman flew very fast. In just half an incense's time, it rushed into the mountain gate of Qinsong School. After flying for a while above the great lake of Dragon Abyss, the light turned again and flew thousands of feet up in the sky, arriving in front of the floating heavenly palace in an instant. After 3 years, Zhang Yan had a different feeling when he came here again. He looked around and glanced at the 3 main halls one by one. When he passed by the hall of Du Zhen, he took another look. At this moment, he suddenly felt his body become heavy and relaxed. The light in front of him dispersed, and he had already landed in front of the side hall he came from. As soon as he stood still, he saw the servant boy on duty taking the initiative to greet him from afar. The servant boy cupped his fist and respectfully said, "Manor head Zhang, the headmaster has said that if you come, there is no need to report to him. You can just enter the hall and see him." Zhang Yan nodded to show that he understood. He tidied up his sleeves and walked into the hall. Not long after, he arrived at the inner hall. He raised his head slightly and saw the sect master sitting on the star platform with a horsetail whisk in his hand. He didn't dare to be rude and walked up to him. He bowed and said, "Disciple Zhang Yan pays respect to Sect Master Reverend." Sect Master Qin looked at him for a while and nodded. He said, "Zhang Yan, you did very well in this sword battle." Zhang Yan bowed slightly and cupped his fists. He said, "I don't deserve Sect Master's praise. I just got a little bit of luck." Sect Master Qin's eyes were filled with praise. He said, "Other than Hu Xian and Qing Yu who got Jun Yang's essence, is the rest of it in your hands?" Zhang Yan didn't hide it and answered frankly, "Yes, other than the Devil Sect's disciple who used it, all the disciples got the essence. At this point, Qin Mabai smiled and pressed his hand to stop him from continuing. He said, "Take out a portion of the essence." Zhang Yan didn't hesitate and did as he was told. He took out a jade bottle from his sleeve. Sect Master Qin waved his hand and took the jade bottle. He said, "This matter ends here. Don't mention it in front of me in the future. Do you understand?" Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. He bowed and said, "I understand." Looking at the sect master's attitude, it seemed that he didn't care much about the Jun Yang's essence. Even if he took a portion, it was only to calm him down. But since he had made so many plans and set up both paths in the open and in the dark, if it wasn't to get the essence, then what was it for? Just as he was pondering, Sect Master Qin said, "I summoned you here today because I have another matter to discuss with you." Zhang Yan cupped his fists and said, "Please tell me, Sect Master." At this moment, a servant boy walked in and reported, "Sect Master, Jinren Shin has arrived and is waiting outside." Sect Master Qin waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and said, "Invite him in." Not long after, Shen Baishuang stepped into the hall. He came forward and bowed, saying, "Baishuang greets Sect Master Shixiang." Sect Master Qin chuckled and said, "Shixiang, you don't have to be so polite. Sit down and talk." Shen Baishuang cupped his fists again and sat at the side. Sect Master Qin's expression was kind. He said, "Shitty Shen, I was just talking about that matter with Zhang Yan. You came at the right time, so you can talk about it." Shen Baishuang straightened his body and said, "Shitty Shen, when I traveled to Dongxing continent, I was ordered by the sect to build a branch for Qinsang school there. But this time, I returned to the sect. I was preparing to meditate and cultivate. When the time came for me to break through, I would not go out. But it would be inappropriate if no one took over that place. Now that we have discussed it, Sect Master Shixiang is interested in you. I also think that it is suitable. What do you think?" Sect Master Qin smiled and said, "Zhang Yan, if you are not willing, it is fine." "That's fine. Just don't go out in the next 100 years. Just stay in the mansion and cultivate." Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. The sect master ordered him to take over Shen Baishuang's branch. There was a subtle meaning behind it. Shen Baishuang did not look like he was willing, so it must have been discussed beforehand. But when he thought about it carefully, he secretly praised it. The sect master's arrangement had a hidden intention of protecting him. Everyone knew that he had taken the essence of Jun Yang of the great continent. However, the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. Although he was not afraid, if he went to another continent, not only could he temporarily hide from the wind, he could also cultivate in peace. Now that the devil's tribulation had started, if he went to the Dongxing continent, even if someone from the devil's doctrine came looking for him, it would at most be 1 or 2 people. However, cultivating in the mansion was not necessarily safe. Not to mention the various sects, even the elders and disciples of the Qinsang school would most likely come looking for him after knowing that a lot of Jun Yang's essence was in his hands. It was better to go out and cultivate peacefully. After thinking for a while, he made up his mind and said loudly, "Since it is the arrangement of the sect master and martial uncle Shen, there is no reason to refuse. I am willing to go." When Shen Baishuang heard what he said, he seemed to be slightly relieved and said happily, "I have taken in a few registered disciples there, but they are not officially part of the sect yet. After you go, martial nephew, you can test them on my behalf. If there are any who do not live up to your expectations, you can punish them. There is no need to give me face." Zhang Yan did not stand on ceremony and said with a smile, "Since he is martial uncle's disciple, he is also my junior brother. Martial nephew will definitely discipline him on martial uncle's behalf." Sect Master Qin nodded and said, "After you go, the disciples of the Zhaoyu mansion will look after them for you. There is no need to worry. I will send people to teach them divine abilities and Dao techniques. There will not be any delay." Zhang Yan was overjoyed. Just this one matter was worth him going. He bowed and said, "On behalf of the sect, this disciple thanks the sect master. Sect master Qin nodded slightly and said, in at most 1 to 200 years, one of the 4 hidden devil's caves will appear. At that time, there will be a battle between our Xian Gate and the devil sects. I hope that your cultivation will improve by then, so that you can come back to the sect to help. Zhang Yan's mind changed. The 6 devil sects had lost the sword battle this time, so they would probably hide even deeper and wait for the opportunity to come before exerting their strength. After all, they had waited for thousands and tens of thousands of years. They would not be unable to endure a mere 1 to 200 years. It was just that by then, even if he did not have the cultivation of the 3rd level of Yuanying, he would have already entered the 2nd level. Sect Master Qin said again, previously, you won the sword battle. Although you went in the name of the Yaoyin clan, you also won a lot of face for our Qinsang school. Since I want to reward you, I will first bestow you a spell. He raised his hand and pointed. A golden talisman flew into Zhang Yan's forehead. When Shenbai Shuang saw that, he smiled and said, since you want disciple nephew Zhang to help, as your uncle master, I can't let you do it for nothing. He also extended his hand and a red light entered Zhang Yan's sleeve. Sect Master Qin took a look and said in surprise, Junior Brother Shen, is that the Dharma treasure that Uncle Master Zhua gave you before you left? Shen Baishuang nodded and said, that's right. However, I no longer have any use for this item. Now that I've given it to disciple nephew Zhang, I can be considered to have made the best use of it. Zhang Yan bowed and said, thank you, Sect Master, Uncle Master Shen, for your gift. Sect Master Qin waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and said, this matter must not be leaked. Go back to the residence and settle down first. After this matter is over, you can choose a day to set off. P.S. Friendly recommendation: Emperor Xiaoyang, wait for the Taoist priest in the clouds to show you the turbulent world of the 5 factions competing for supremacy. Chapter 6:15. Lu Yan wore a white robe, her hair tied up with a jade ring. She stood in front of the bright Serenity Cave with a graceful and fairy-like appearance. Because she knew that Zhang Yan was about to return, she led a group of people to wait at the top of the lake. Other than Tian Kuan, the Wang sisters, and Han Zuocheng, Wang Ziyuan and Yuan Yanhui were also among them. Behind them was a young man and woman, Lu Yanni's disciples, Zhua Hanzhang and Lin Xixue. Zhua Hanzhang moved closer to Lin Xixue and whispered, Junior apprentice sister, do you know that Grandmaster won first place in the sword competition of the 18 sects? Lin Xixue's eyes widened. Where did senior apprentice brother hear this? Although the result of the sword competition had been known to the world 3 years ago, they had been in seclusion in the sect for the past few years and had not heard of the outside world. It was only half a day ago that they heard that Grandmaster Zhang Yan was about to return. Just now, they had come out of seclusion. Zhua Hanzhang said proudly, Senior apprentice brother, I just now received a letter from the Xie brothers. Lin Xixue exclaimed, Senior apprentice brother, can you tell me in detail? Qinsang school was divided into different manors and islands. The status of the disciples was determined by the teachers in the manors. Although the bright Serenity Cave was outside the sect, Qinsang school treated its disciples with respect when they went out. This was all because of Zhang Yan's reputation in the sect. Especially after he achieved Yuanying, things were different. Now that Grandmaster won first place in the sword competition, it was obvious that the status of the bright Serenity Lake in the sect had risen a lot. Zhua Hanzhang blinked, Junior apprentice sister, if you are willing to lend me your blue jade cauldron for a few days, I will tell you. How about it? Lin Xixue's beautiful eyes turned and she smiled, Senior apprentice brother is blackmailing me again. Forget it, little sister won't ask you. If Grandmaster returns, Senior Uncle Wei will definitely return. At that time, little sister will ask him. It's better than hearing things from others. Zhua Hanzhang wanted to say something, but he suddenly saw a golden light flying through the sky, the sound of it piercing through the clouds. It was extremely imposing. His body couldn't help but tremble as he exclaimed in a low voice, Grandmaster has returned. Lu Yeni took a step forward and knelt on the ground. She said, "Disciple Lu Yeni. Welcome back to Master's residence." The disciples of Clear Nether Manor also knelt down in unison. At that moment, no one dared to make a sound. Zhang Yan arrived on the wind and slowly descended from the clouds. After he stood firmly on the ground, his eyes scanned the area and he understood everyone's cultivation. He smiled and said, "Get up, follow me back to the mansion to talk." With a casual point of his finger, an array door rose in front of him. Then, he rolled up his sleeves, and a gust of strong wind swirled on the ground, pulling everyone into it. After arriving at the main hall of the mansion, because he remembered that he was about to leave and that he would be gone for a long time, he summoned his disciples one by one and gave them some pointers. He didn't even miss out on the third-generation disciples. Zhua Hanzhang and Lin Xixuan knew that this grandmaster rarely passed down his techniques. Now that they were being taught, they were excited. Luo Xiao was very familiar with Zhang Yan's way of doing things. Seeing him like this, she had a thoughtful expression and said in a low voice to Shang Shang, who was standing next to her, "Little sister Shang, go and prepare some spirit shells. The more of them, maybe Master will need them." Shang Shang didn't ask for the reason, nodded slightly, and went to do as she was told. About 2 hours later, Zhang Yan finally finished passing down his techniques. He then dismissed all the disciples, leaving only his eldest disciple, Lu Yeni, behind. "Master will not be able to stay for long after returning to the mansion this time. As for where I will be going, it is not convenient to say. This time, it will probably be 100 or 200 years before I can return. The matters of the sect will be in your hands, Yeni." Lu Yeni's face was calm, and she didn't ask for the specific reason. She just nodded seriously and said, "Disciple understands, Master can rest assured." Zhang Yan looked at her with approval and said, "Other than that, there is one more thing. Yeni, you need to go to the Fangchen courtyard. In the past, I promised a Taoist named Su Jing that after 3 years, I will take him in as a disciple of the Zhaoyu sect. It is inconvenient for me to do this, so you will go in my place." Lu Yeni's jade face turned serious and said, "Disciple understands." Zhang Yan said, "After Master leaves, there will be seniors in the sect to teach you divine arts and Taoist techniques. This matter was arranged by Master in advance, so there is no need to worry." After explaining some matters, half a day had passed, and he ordered his eldest disciple to leave. He thought to himself, "Before I leave for Dongxing continent, I need to inform senior brother Zhou." He thought for a moment, and because he was afraid that Zhou Chengju wasn't in the courtyard, he cast a spell and sent a letter. Not long later, a letter came back, but it was said that Zhou Chengju was still refining pills, and there were at least 5 more days before he could come out. Zhang Yan put down the letter, and thought for a moment. He suddenly jumped down into the underwater manor, and in an instant, he was in the depths of the Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake. When he got here, he felt the spiritual wave surging, and the waves gathered into a violent whirlpool, gathering at one place. He looked over, and saw that the god-beast egg was peacefully lying on a rock in the water. The whirlpool was caused by it swallowing a large amount of spiritual energy. Luckily, this place was a cave abode, otherwise, it wouldn't be able to contain it, and it would have been sucked dry long ago. Zhang Yan circled around the thing twice, and felt that it wasn't time for it to come out of the shell. He didn't stay any longer, and jumped back into the cave abode, sitting on the jade platform. He then went into meditation. Just like that, a few days passed. On the 7th day, he woke up from his meditation, and after looking around, he jumped up and rode a streak of light towards Danding Courtyard. After entering the mountain gate, he didn't face any obstructions, and in a short while, he arrived in front of the fishing tower. Zhou Chengju sensed his arrival, and came out of the cabin with a delighted expression, "Junior brother, I have been waiting for a long time." Zhang Yan landed and wanted to bow, but Zhou Chengju held him up, smiling, "We are brothers, so there is no need to be so distant." Zhang Yan didn't force him, and followed Zhou Chengju into the room. After both of them sat down, they started to talk about their past. When he heard that on Zhang Yan's way back, there was a Yuxiao school's paradise venerable who intercepted him, Zhou Chengju's eyes turned serious, and he said solemnly, I already know about this matter. This person is called Zhou Ruiying, and we are of the same generation. She is from the Zhou family's concubine bloodline, and because of her outstanding talent, she was taken in by that old man Lingye to teach her Dao techniques. This was why Lingye took her in as a disciple and taught her techniques. Who knew that she had already formed a grotto heaven? There's one more Daoist heavenly abode in the Zhou clan, and he's even harder to deal with than before. When the Zhou clan was mentioned, although his expression was calm, his eyes were cold. At this moment, he seemed to have thought of something and said, Junior brother, you don't have to worry. This person stopped you this time only because he borrowed the power of the 10 powers. With your current status. On this trip to the Dongshan continent, you don't have to worry about him finding trouble with you. Otherwise, my Qinsang school will definitely not let this matter rest. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. So senior brother Zhou already knows about this. Zhou Chengju smiled and said, before the sect leader talked to you in detail, he had already told me. Your elder brother also agrees with this. You are going to the East Victory continent. It might be a fortuitous encounter. Listening to his words, Zhang Yan seemed to have a deeper meaning. He asked, does senior martial brother have anything else to say? Zhou Chengju smiled. He said, Junior brother, I heard that Feng Haiyang borrowed Jun Yang's spiritual essence and broke through the third gate. Zhang Yan nodded and said, that's true. I only won by luck. After Zhou Chengju asked in detail, he stroked his beard and said in a deep voice, it seems that this wind ocean Dharma body is undoubtedly the spirit Dharma body. Otherwise, it would be much more difficult for you to deal with it. Zhang Yan asked suspiciously, spiritual Dharmakaya. Zhou Chengju glanced at him and said slowly, this matter is not recorded in the Taoist book, it is passed down by the various sects verbally, so junior martial brother does not know about it. The avatars of Yuanying cultivators were actually divided into 4 grades. Among them, the worst was known as the hidden aspect Dharma body. It was the result of using 5 types of impure qi in one's cultivation, causing one's cultivation method to be impure. As a result, after one's incarnation, one's future path would be severed, and they would not be able to reach the great path. Needless to say, the first grade is the spirit Dharma body. Most cultivators in the world condense this Dharma body after achieving the 3rd realm. From what you said, Feng Haiyang's Dharma body must have been formed in a hurry. If there are no accidents, it is also the 2nd grade. Zhang Yan had never heard of this before, so he asked, what are the first 2 grades? Zhou Chengju said, the 3rd grade is called illumination. The one who illuminates will be able to see both inside and outside, and his qi will be unobstructed. It is much more powerful than the spirit Dharma body. As for the 1st grade, it is called the Yuanjin Dharma body. This Dharma body is formed by the innate heaven, and it can be used to communicate with one's qi. Only those who have formed their Dan and above can try it. It is the most difficult to achieve among our generation of cultivators. I don't know about it in Qinsang school, but in the Zhou clan, only a few people have achieved this in the past 10,000 years. At this point, he turned around and said solemnly, Junior martial brother, if you want to achieve great things in the future, you must achieve this Dharma body. Zhang Yan humbly asked, Senior martial brother, do you have any wonderful methods to teach me? Zhou Chengju knocked on the table and said in a deep voice, it is not easy to cultivate this Dharma body. Once a cultivator enters the 2nd realm, he needs to cultivate with the pure spiritual essence of heaven and earth, and must not be contaminated with any impurities. The Jun Yang Qi essence that you obtained is one of the 2 essences. However, other than this Qi essence, there is one more thing missing. He took out a leather bag from his sleeve and handed it over with both hands. He said, Junior martial brother, keep it well. After Zhang Yan took it, he pointed at it and said, this item is called the White Moon Soul. I used a secret technique of the Zhou clan to collect several spiritual items to refine it. It contains the essence of the Kun spirit. After you enter the second realm, refine it together with the Jun Yang Qi essence, and you will get a miraculous effect. Zhang Yan thought for a while and asked curiously, Senior Marshal Brother, have you been preparing this item for a long time? Zhou Chengju chuckled and said, ever since your Dan reached the first grade, I've spent dozens of years to refine this much. I originally wanted to try my luck, but I didn't expect Junior Marshal Brother to live up to my expectations and snatch back so much of Jun Yang's spiritual essence. My efforts weren't in vain. However, the rare ingredients required to refine this pill are too rare. The pill that I have refined can only last for a year at most. My pill formula is in that leather bag. After you go to the Dongshan continent, you need to keep an eye out for it. If you can find some, you can refine it yourself. Zhang Yan couldn't help but sigh. On the road of cultivation, if there was a wise master to guide him, he could indeed avoid many detours. If Zhou Chengju wasn't born in the Zhou clan and was an alchemy grandmaster, how would he know these things? For the next few hours, Zhou Chengju was afraid that Zhang Yan would make a mistake in refining the pill, so he carefully told him about the taboos and tricks. When the sun was about to set, he was satisfied and let him go. Before he left, Zhou Chengju suddenly thought of something and called out to him, oh yes, half a year ago, Qiantian achieved the third realm of Yuanying. As you weren't in the mountain gate, I passed the gift on your behalf. If there's a letter, you don't have to run back. Zhang Yan thought of something and asked, what grade is Senior Marshal Brother Qi's Dharmakaya? Zhou Chengju shook his head and said, I've never seen it before. Based on Qi Yuntian's cultivation method, it is the most superior method in the Yutsang sect. His qi is also very pure. I think he must have at least obtained the Illumination Dharmakaya. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.